also tweet out. Like the thing. You know, the thing. No, I don't know. It's not the thing, because then people will think we're talking about John Carpenter's The Thing, which we are not. Although there are similarities, such as being out in the snow and a monster and stuff. Okay. The Burly Man, all right. The Burly Man. I mean, we're going to have to live up to that, you realize. I'm not sure. I need to somehow measure. I feel like I might have given myself too much of the screen, but it might be an optical illusion. So let me find a way to measure. Oh, people are saying that they cannot hear you. Good thing that I did that. Just chatting. Okay, so we want there. Now, if Casey says something.
Hello?
People should be able to hear that. It's probably too loud. They'll probably complain that you're way too loud. A bit loud. Okay, I'll turn it down a little bit. Okay, so the distance here, I'm using an envelope and a pen to mark out the distance on the screen. Yeah, I was greedy and took too much space, as I'm told men always do in the modern society.
All right. I'll also invite you to a squad stream in case that makes any difference at all.
We can own some noobs. So the one game that might be interesting to play but might not is Among Us. I don't know if you've seen that at all.
I have not.
It's like a 10-player game. It's like if you took Werewolf or Vampire or one of those, but actually made a game where people are wandering around trying to do. It's like, you know, it's like The Thing actually, or like there's crew on a spaceship and two of them are aliens. And it could be fun, but you need like 10 people to play it, and I don't know how that works. All right,
so I think the only other thing I need to do is I feel like, much like you would have the situation, I feel like they won't...
I just lost you again. Your audio is now completely silent. It's like Nadine's drapes in Twin Peaks. It's completely, after she puts the cotton balls in, it's completely silent.
Hey, John.
Yes.
Can you say something?
I'm trying to find my mouse so I can make my text bigger.
Looks. I think we're good now. All right. I might have to adjust your levels a bit once we actually start, just to make sure I have those correct. But
I've been taking all my proper medication. My levels should be fine.
all right. Here goes nothing. Here goes nothing.
I cannot find the mouse that I usually use for the laptop. I might have left it in Austin. Rip.
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 I feel like you're the kind of person who often leaves things places.
You know,
Is that a fair? Would that be a fair assessment?
okay, I was going to send you and Jeff a while back a screenshot of an Amazon page, which I did not send.
Okay.
The Amazon page is all the times that I've bought Automatic ER4P headphones. I believe I'm up to 7 now, but one of them is a backup pair that's in the cupboard. So
It's working. Literally, this is so lame. Every time I switch resolutions on this thing, every time, it switches the thing back. Okay, I think we're good. Also, how do we lock this down so other people can't join our meeting?
I don't know. I mean, if nobody else has the link, they probably can't, right?
Well, they can't join, but it would pop up an annoying little, do you want to let this person join? Although, maybe...
I don't think I would see that.
Yeah, I
I'm
probably
looking
wouldn't
just
either,
at
because
your-
I created it from a different machine. So I think we're probably good.
Okay, I'm looking for your squad stream. There we go. Invites. Accept. We are now in a squad.
Oh, hey, look, there's X13. Hello there. How's it going, George? Can everyone hear me? Can anyone hear me or John?
Yeah, how is my volume on my end as well? Chat. Is it good? Does like for our volumes to match? Really, what has to happen?
Yeah, and I think I need to move this a little closer, probably for optimal noise freeness.
This is the absolute first time that everyone has said the volume is okay
in the history of mankind.
Someone says John is 90% of Casey's volume. All right, I'm going to turn Casey down a hair, but I don't know how to make Casey 90% of his current volume because it's decibels. So like you're at minus 4.1 decibels. So I'm going to make you minus 4.4 decibels.
I'm also going to fix a few things here because I think we may have a channel issue. Where's the little...
Someone says density is a little off. I don't know what that is.
On a mono.
I don't know what that is.
Hey, floor is lava. Is that any better? All right, cool. All right. Then I'm going to go take a quick... I'm going to just go grab like a water and stuff before we start.
Yeah.
But otherwise, we'll be almost on time. This probably will just crash and burn in 5 seconds because
easily. I mean,
us actually starting within 10 plus or minus 10 minutes of the start time. Okay.
It'll be like the TV show.
Yeah. All right. I'll be right back. Hopefully, we'll see what happens. All right.
Well, I will have a discussion with myself now about all these exciting things. camera really is standing up to having the image big. However, we are only pulling down the image from the camera at 1080p, and I believe I could do 4K if I set it up right. But we're not going to worry about that right now. We're going to leave it on 1080. We're going to leave it on 1080. Yeah. What kind of camera is it? It's a Sony Alpha 7 III, which is the most ridiculous model number. It's more ridiculous even than computer model numbers. And the lens is, I don't know, it's some lens that I got. It's probably not the best one for this scenario. But it's better than a webcam. I had a pretty good webcam, and this is way better than a pretty good webcam. It's not new. I've been using this camera ever since early this year. I forget when I hooked it up. I actually bought it last year, but just was lazy for a while and didn't plug it in. And then I finally did. And I'm glad I did. It's a good camera. What software do you use? None really. I have a Camlink 4K with an HDMI input, and you just plug it right into there, and then Windows sees it as a capture device.
Alrighty.
Alrighty. Well,
sounds like we're good to go.
Are we good? Okay, great.
I think so.
Well, thanks everybody for stopping by. We'll see you next week. No.
I think we should quit while we're ahead. I mean, all of the audio visual stuff is like nominally working right now. I feel like that's our cue to kind of end it while we still can.
Yeah. Well, so Casey and I decided, I guess a while ago. How long ago did we decide to do something like this? It was like last year.
It was on your stream. Like we were on your stream discussing like a tech thing. Like I don't know if it was the water one or if it was the one like before that. Yeah. But we were just like, we should talk about a movie sometime.
Yeah, I have really weird. So I've known Casey for a long time. I don't remember when I first met you. I want to say it was like 1998, but it was like a
I think that's about right. It was like 97 or 98, yeah.
I was visiting Chris at the Definition 6 office in Seattle, and you came in to grab something. That was like the first time I think that I met. Anyway, but I've known Casey, pretty well since, well before Braid came out, right? Like 2006, 2005. Actually, I knew you well enough. I remember when we were shutting down Bolt Action, and I was telling you how I was going to be in debt for a long time. You were disgusted with what I was saying or something. Like I didn't know how to. Anyway, so
I also remember Bernd Habermeyer or somebody was your I remember all of this just very.
So that was
vaguely.
Like 2000, 2001. Okay. So anyway, my memory is that I remember having some conversations with you way back then about us agreeing pretty solidly on some things, right? But then lately, I don't feel like that's the way it is, right? Lately, I feel like we have pretty divergent viewpoints about things. But I think also we're both people who are kind of picky. Let's just say we have standards, right?
Yes.
We have standards that we want things to meet. And it's interesting that they're both, I think, pretty higher than most people's, but they're both pretty different too. Like, I don't completely even understand what your standards are necessarily, right?
Same
and
here.
So that's kind of part of what's interesting to me about having this kind of discussion.
Same here,
We could talk about the show, but I also get to see how you see it.
And I think the other part of that is that we knew that was true earlier on too, because of like, at the very least, stuff like Sleepy Time Gorilla Museum was a thing that like, I was just like, I don't like I understand that you think that this is good in a particular way that I don't actually see, and it's like there's a couple of those sorts of specific things that I remember being like, okay, so obviously this person comes at this a very different way, but I don't necessarily know what the way is, so I can't predict it, right?
Yeah.
I know when it happens, but I don't actually know. Like I can't say, oh, this is a band John will like, and this is a band he won't like. I have no idea, right? Yep. So, I mean, I know you probably aren't going to be like, this Taylor Swift album is awesome, but like, I don't know. Like, other than that, I don't know much.
Nope.
So anyway, we did not plan this stream at all. What we did was I randomly happened to watch The Terror, which basically I've been looking for some shows to watch. Anna and I actually will watch shows sometimes, like try to watch series or something, and just stuff that's supposed to be good. And the weird thing is, like, it's hard to find anything good. There's like hundreds of thousands of shows, and it's hard to find anything good. So sometimes I'll try to read to see if anyone has put together a list of like well-written shows or just anything to start with to cull it somewhat. And I know I'm going to be disappointed because like Rotten Tomatoes is totally wrong almost all the time now. And I don't know. I don't know where to go. But I was looking at a list and it had a bunch of them. And I was going through some of them. And The Terror was one of them. Watched it. And season 1 is separate from season 2. So I only watched like season 1. Season 2 is a completely different show. It's like it's just every season a completely different show. I watched season 1 and I sent to on like group chat with John and Jeff. I sent like, I thought this show was pretty good. I would recommend it. And John happened to watch it. That's the only reason we're now doing this stream.
Yeah, well, we'd been intending to do something like this sort of halfway, and then this came up, and it was like, sure. Yeah. And this, okay, so I think there's 10 episodes, right? And they're like a little less than an hour each.
All I wanted to get out of that is like, I didn't even take notes because I didn't know we were doing this. So we're going in cold. You get what you get.
I actually have some notes of things that I would talk about, but they're not like extensive, serious notes.
Cool.
Right?
Yeah. If we do this again,
I actually knew that we were going to do this.
You did
when I was watching most of the episodes, and you didn't. Right. You didn't know.
So that's what happened.
So I should start with the disclaimer that may invalidate much of what I'm going to say about this show, right?
Fair enough.
Have we talked about wine before?
We have never talked about wine.
Okay.
Also, I don't drink wine.
I don't drink wine either. A lot of people drink wine, right? A lot of people think it's fancy. You go look at their online dating profile and they're like, I love to go wine tasting or whatever, right?
Okay.
Because it's this cultural thing where people feel like they're sophisticated if they enjoy wine, right?
Okay. Yes.
Wine tastes nasty to me.
It does.
And I think I have a certain taste bud thing that makes almost all wine taste kind of bitter, right?
I agree.
Kind of like, so some people don't like cilantro, right? Like some people think cilantro tastes like soap. I really like cilantro. Cilantro tastes really good.
Same here.
I think there's something like that with wine, and I think it affects a substantial portion of the population, all right?
Yep.
Like 5, 10, 15%, something like that.
Yes.
But you don't hear about it. Why? Because all of these people are going around pretending that they like wine, even though it tastes nasty to them, and or don't realize that they're pretending, but they're just like, everybody else says this is good. It tastes bitter to me, but I'm gonna say it's nice because that's what everybody says, right? And so this relates to Shakespeare as well. We were talking about Shakespeare a little bit.
We were.
Shakespearean language is very hard to understand, even if you're reading it slowly, right?
Yep.
Much harder to understand even when it's happening live, in front of you. Although, sometimes the visuals help you disambiguate or the tone of voice helps you, but
if the actors actually really knows Shakespeare very well, that can be very helpful because they will emote clues to you. But if they don't know, which oftentimes they don't really, then it's just even worse because they might emote something totally not contextually appropriate.
Yeah,
right?
well, that was the thing is so... I don't necessarily hold the Shakespeare plays in as high of esteem as many people do, relative to other works of art, right? Some people say,
I don't like them at all.
Shakespeare is the greatest thing ever. I like them. I like some of them. Some of them irritate me.
Okay.
But I also, I kind of have to keep my opinion restrained there because I don't totally understand them that well, right? Maybe if I understood them a lot better, I would like them more, appreciate them more, right?
Gotcha.
But what is for sure, again, is most of the people watching Shakespeare plays don't understand them any better than I do. But they pretend that they do, right? And so one time I went to see Shakespeare in upstate New York with someone who lived in New York who was inviting me. She's like, oh, I go every year and it's great. And I went and watched the play. I forget even which one it was. It was one of the comedies where these guys at some point disguise themselves as like visiting bankers so that they can woo the women that they're after.
Okay.
Like whichever play that is, right?
About 20 years ago, I could have told you exactly what play that is, but it's all been paged out.
Yeah, I took a Shakespeare class in college where we do like most of them. But anyway, so I was like, I had a hard time understanding what people were saying, right? Mm-hmm. I kind of vaguely understood the plot points of the play, but a lot of things didn't quite make sense because whatever. So I can't really appreciate this play that well because I didn't get why certain things made sense, seemingly were supposed to make sense. I didn't understand what was happening some of the times. I didn't understand what people were playing or what they were saying sometimes. And so I asked my friend who goes to Shakespeare all the time and says it's great. Like, what about this specific thing or what happened at this point? She didn't know any better than I did.
Yeah.
Right. So
well, let me say a few things about that because I literally, when I graduated from high school, my English teacher gave me the Yale Shakespeare as a graduation gift. It was like this thick. It was this
the big brown one,
annotated. It was so large that I don't know what you're supposed to do with this book.
Yeah,
it's
I had
clearly
that in
just
college.
for graduate. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
And this was because I guess he thought I liked it. I'm not sure because
like it also had very thin pages, right? It's
yes.
like giant with very thin pages. Yeah.
And I guess I want to say over the course of my lifetime, I've probably seen in the thousands of plays, if you count musicals.
That's
like,
a lot more than me.
Many. Like sometimes I go to multiple in a week, right? In the old days anyway. Yeah. So I am confident in saying that while I am not a Shakespeare scholar by any stretch of the imagination, I'm pretty certain I can definitively say that it wasn't because I didn't understand it. I think I understood it just fine. It's just not very good for the axes I tend to care about. I tend to like things that are constructed somewhat deliberately and interestingly. So it's one of the reasons I like your games. It's because it's pretty obvious when I'm playing them that someone spent a lot of time thinking about why any particular thing happened or not, which is not the same as saying I know why. Like, I may not actually know what the person was thinking when they made it, but I can get this sense that, like, this was crafted with some seriousness, right? And I tend to like the Amish furniture, right? I like it when I feel like I got something that someone spent a lot of time crafting. Shakespeare's language stuff seems like it probably was that way, meaning there's so much effort put into the verse in Shakespeare that I can appreciate that there was probably a lot of craftsmanship going on there. Unfortunately, it's so old and so out of date compared to the way I speak and sound that it's lost on my ear. I understand usually, I'm able to parse it pretty easily, but I don't see the beauty in it, right? Like, there's something about its degree of removal from my time period that it may have sounded awesome to the people who were listening to it then. Like, if you were in the rows and listening to this or something, maybe it sounded amazing. And if I teleported back there, I think it was just awesome, right? But today, to my ear, it just sounds kind of forced and hackneyed, right? It's just not that good.
Have you seen the YouTube videos about the guys who like reverse engineered what the pronunciation actually was in that time based on?
I would love to hear it.
There's lots of things that are supposed to rhyme in Shakespeare that very obviously don't rhyme in like modern. And then there's other things that are sort of puns where like one word is supposed to remind you of another one, but it doesn't anymore. And so
they kind of worked out.
Yeah, and it's kind of more like a Boston accent than like what we think of as an English accent now. So they go and they read some of it.
Shakespeare's like pack the car kind of stuff, or
I mean, not quite, but sort of. You can look this up later.
Come over here. Yeah, that would be an amazing Shakespeare.
It would be interesting to go see those guys do the plays.
Yeah,
sure. I mean, you still probably wouldn't get a lot of the things, right? But anyway, what you said about not appreciating it because it's too far removed is pretty much what I was trying to say as well.
Yeah.
Which brings me to my point, which is this show, though being modern,
Yeah.
was very hard for me to understand very often. Like I was sitting there watching it. I had no idea what the hell people were saying half the time.
Yes. Yes.
And sometimes I like that. So what I remember as being one of my favorite TV shows was Deadwood, right? I haven't watched it in a long time. Well, I don't know what I would think of it today.
Pause for 1 second just for people out there. So this show, I believe, at least tries nominally to get accents correct. And since everyone here was British or Irish or some other lineage of seafarer from the British Navy, there's heavy accents in this show. They are not speaking in a clean, like Americanized dialect that's easy to understand. It's heavily accented in a number of places and different accents.
Yeah, and so some characters I understand a lot better than others. Are we full free fire on spoilers here? I assume so, because otherwise we're not.
We are going to spoiler. There's going to be so many spoilers in this thing that you're going to be like a spoiled milk, like a rotten milk with mold in it by the time we're done spoiling.
Kind of like Sir John, but anyway.
Yes.
Yeah, so if you don't want to be spoiled, just leave and come watch the recording later. Anyway, I just wanted to bring up some examples. Like, so sometimes, people have like last words that are supposed to be dramatic. And like, it's a short phrase. And I don't have enough time to figure out what they're saying because sometimes the length of what someone's saying helps you understand, right?
Yeah.
And even some of the longer ones. So like episode 9 or 10, there's a guy talking about how he went to Catholic church when he was a kid.
Yep.
And it goes on for like 5 minutes, right?
Yeah, I know.
Maybe not too long, but like, Yeah. And I was just like, I've been listening to this guy for 3 minutes. I kind of vaguely understand what he's saying.
Yeah.
But like,
he talks about
like I don't actually understand what he's saying.
Right.
But somehow my brain gets it, but I still don't get it. Right. Like, and so I feel like I probably didn't like this show as much as you. And some of it may have been that may be preventing, like even though you're also saying it's hard to understand, it actually may be harder for me to understand because one other weird thing that I've always noticed when I go to like a loud place, like a nightclub, I spent a lot of time in nightclubs in my 20s. I had a harder time talking to people than other people. And I don't think it's because my hearing was worse. I think it's just my brain doesn't
the filtering
like
is not quite as good
well.
or something.
Yeah. This is something weird like that. And so that might have been in play here as well.
Totally fair.
So you might have still understood it better than me.
Well, to be fair too, like I can think of plenty of reasons not to like this show. So it's not like I'm shocked either way if someone liked it or didn't like it. So we can kind of get to that in a second. But I would actually agree. I didn't have a hard time understanding most of it, but there were definitely a few times when someone would say something where I was like, probably should have had subtitles on for that because I was like, I do not know exactly what that person just said. And that's par for the course with heavily accented British stuff. I think if you're not really good with British accents, when you get to some of the more esoteric ones that are not like the clean upper crust kind that are pretty easy to understand, you end up with like, okay, wow, yeah, that's far enough away from Americanized English that it's hard. I imagine that people probably have trouble watching American shows that have heavily accented stuff. I could see certain Southern accents and certain like New York accents or things like this that would just be really hard for people to understand, right? Like, but we just, we've heard them enough.
Yeah, I just put a spoiler warning in my stream title, by the way, just in case. Yeah, so and it's weird. Like I've been to England a bunch of times. I've been to London a ton of times, and it's like I've been to Brighton a couple times, and Guildford and places like that.
Yeah.
Never really had any problems understanding people.
All right. Well, another problem though too, right, is like modern like dialogue balance is always screwed up. So like it's also it's usually insult to injury because not only is it accented, but like usually the balance is not great on most things I watch these days, especially movies. I didn't think this show was that bad, but it probably wasn't nearly as good as it could have been because not that bad is still not fantastic.
Yeah, it felt actually kind of like a Christopher Nolan movie to me that way. Like that dude mixes dialogue in a way that it's hard for me to understand sometimes when it's
I don't think you're alone in that one. I feel like Tenet, recently people were talking about how no one can understand what anyone's saying. I haven't seen it, but people are literally saying like no one knows what's being said in the film, apparently. Yeah. Anyway, so let me before we get into the show then, now that we got some background, let me explain what this show is for people who haven't seen it. The Terror is an anthology show. Each season is separate, so you don't watch, the seasons don't relate to each other, is my understanding. There's only 2 seasons of it currently. Season 1 is essentially a heavily dramatized, meaning there's no plausible way, period, that this is actually what happened in
I don't
history.
know, man. It's pretty realistic.
I don't know. Okay, well, yeah, all right. Historical fiction about the Franklin expedition, which is, of course, a famous expedition. I'd actually read about it before, where they were trying to find the Northwest Passage, as the British Empire was often, and everyone else too, I suppose, was trying to do. And they failed, of course, to find the Northwest Passage, and everybody died. It's remarkable in the sense that I don't know if there were any other expeditions that were quite so catastrophic. Like, this was 2 full ships, full complement, staffed for like 3 years worth of provisions, and everything was lost. Not a single soul survived. And the ships were both lost. We've only recently recovered them in the past 20 years. They've found the wreckages of these ships, but that's how lost they were. So this is a fictionalized, heavily fictionalized, like, retelling. It's based on a book by Dan Pattinson, I think, called The Terror. And I don't know how closely it hews to the book because I haven't read it. But season 1 is that. Season 2 is set in a Japanese internment camp. Has nothing to do with this. We haven't watched that yet, so we're not talking about that. We're just talking about season 1. 10 episodes, about 45 minutes apiece. It's on AMC, so I believe that meant it had commercial breaks. And neither of us watched it with those breaks. We watched it on streaming. Yeah. So that's what we watched. And so, John, I said I liked this show. So yes. Why? And you didn't necessarily like the show, or at least didn't like it that much. So why don't you start off describing? I mean, why don't you just lead off? You don't have to lead off with anything particular, but why don't you lead off?
I will say there are certainly inflection points. So there was a time when I was complaining to you about it via instant message, which is also the time when we decided to do this, right?
Yes.
That was sort of the nadir of how much I liked the show. Right after that, it got a little bit better to me.
Okay.
And then it sort of plateaued. I wouldn't ever say that I super like it.
Okay.
I do think it's better than probably the majority of, modern streaming TV shows. Like if you pick, if you pick a random Netflix show or whatever, it's worse than this, right?
Yeah. That's
so
what I thought.
We agree there. Is it good enough that I would be hyped to watch season 2? Maybe not. I would be interested in the way that, like, I hope season 2 is a little better,
Fair enough.
So the reason why I was bummed, like 3 episodes in or whatever, right? There are actually some specific things that I can get into, but the general thing was just, I'm watching this show. It's obviously about, I didn't know the historical connection. I didn't know this was a real thing, but okay, it's obviously about people getting killed one by one in long form. That was very clear from the beginning.
Yeah.
So you kind of, this will maybe make more sense later in the discussion, but I'll say briefly, like, that kind of thing makes more sense or is better, works better when the people are kind of trying their best. You know what I mean? People are kind of trying their best, but because people are imperfect, or because their judgment is off a little bit or whatever, things spiral and unexpected things happen and whatever, right?
Yes. Right.
And so that wasn't really what I was seeing in the first couple episodes. It was more like everybody's an asshole. Everybody makes bad, stupid decisions. Yes. Everybody hates everybody else.
Yes.
And humanity is terrible, and let's just flush it all down the toilet right now. Which I don't really appreciate, because A, like, we just have too much of that in fiction, but B, it's not really real. That's not how it would actually be, I don't think, right? At least not in the... So we could talk about the end of the show later. Like, toward the end of the show, that kind of thing is fine, I think, right? But in the beginning, you would have a lot of people constructively trying to solve problems and failing. Now, the place right after I complained to you was the episode when okay, so because I don't understand what people are saying, I have a poor grasp of the names. Is it
Yes.
Burchard, like the the captain of the Terror, the junior captain guy?
So what I should say right up front, and this will always haunt me if we choose to do this as an actual series where you and I talk about shows. I remember almost everything that happens to every character in every show, but not their name. Okay. I never know, like, even in shows that I watched 8 seasons of, I don't know the names of people, like on Mad Men. You're like, I'm just like the guy who did blah. So I don't know. Like, I don't know what that is. My brain will never remember names. So are you talking about Jared Harris, basically?
I don't know the actor, but the guy, there's not really main characters in this too much. There's a couple people who are sort of main. One of them is the guy who's, the captain who they start talking about, right? Where they're pointing at his photo. That's the guy I'm talking about. Right?
Okay, yes. That's Jared Harris, the actor. For some reason, I remember the actor's name.
I don't know him, right? And then sort of the other main character is this guy named Mr. Hickey, who we'll probably talk about. So he becomes one of the main characters more and more as the show goes on, right?
Yes.
And then maybe the Dr. Good Sir,
yes,
is sort of one of the main characters.
Yes.
But there's just a lot of characters, and so like a lot of minor characters get a lot of screen time. Anyway, one reason why this also may be part of my personal problem is I was sort of tapped out on this. So I just read like the first Culture series novel, and in that,
I don't know what that is. Sorry.
It's like this, far future science fiction. There's like 9 books in this series or whatever, and I never read any of them. You hear them referred to a lot as some of the like most far out science fiction.
Far out?
Well, as in terms of imagining a distant future that is impressive or something. Like, I don't know how to put it.
Okay.
I don't find it as impressive as some of the stuff by Greg Egan or whatever, but in terms of the thought behind it.
Right.
Like the first book, just like everybody's an asshole and everybody hates everybody and everybody makes poor decisions. And nobody really has much in the way of redeeming value.
I see.
And I just fucking hated it, right? And I was like, if this is what this series is, I'm not. And then I started reading the second book. And the second book is a guy who plays a lot of games and is very serious about playing games. And he's just a miserable asshole who has no redeeming value. And so is everybody else. And however, I did sort of start reading some notes about it. And apparently this turns around later in the book. But I was just like, I was an hour into the audiobook and I was like, oh my God, not again. Right.
Well, I can possibly add one thing to that, which is to say that I don't think that you and I are probably that far apart on that opinion, with one important caveat, which is I actually have literally no problem watching shows where everyone is an asshole. In fact, I quite enjoy it if I am not meant to root for them. Like, I have a huge, like, for example, an asshole is probably the wrong word, but let's say asshole and or idiot.
Yeah.
So, for example, I cannot watch Marvel movies. And the reason is because everyone in that movie is like stupid. Even characters that are supposed to be very smart, like Tony Stark or something, is an absolute idiot. Like, they're so dumb that they can barely handle like a child's level of strategy when involved in any kind of a fight, right? And so I just can't handle it. I'm just like, why am I watching a bunch of really, really, really severely IQ deficient superheroes run around doing stupid stuff? This is ridiculous.
But that's, in some sense, that's modern writing, right?
Yes,
it's not
certainly.
So to clarify for the audience, I've talked to Casey about this enough that I know exactly what he's saying. It's not that the characters are supposed to be stupid, right? It's that the writers just have no attention span and don't even think.
It's because the writers are stupid. They don't know that the characters are doing stupid things.
if you go on YouTube and search for the phrase pitch meeting and watch the pitch meetings, that is exactly the problem with all these movies. All right.
And as far as I know, that is the process as well.
That's a document. Pitch meeting is a documentary.
Pitch meeting,
it's a hidden camera.
Screen Rant pitch meeting is a documentary on what is actually going on in a writer's room, as far as I know. Because we can talk a little about that later. Because recently I watched 2 things that absolutely they were on Disney Plus. They had making ofs that I watched, and they were some of the most depressing things I've ever seen because they confirmed all of my worst fears and more about how they do writing these days, or don't do writing these days, might be the way to put it. But anyway, so what I was going to say is one of the reasons that I didn't have that problem in particular with this show is because maybe again I had the unfair advantage going into it, is I knew about the Franklin expedition, and my understanding of that expedition had always been that everyone on it was stupid. So I felt like I was seeing a fairly plausible kind of group of characters because they were literally really bad at Arctic exploration, and apparently, at least as far as we know from what we've recovered, just made really bad decisions and did things that people shouldn't do. So I was actually okay with that, because I'm like, yeah, they probably did have people in charge who just really shouldn't have been there. And like they said in the actual show, these people were no one's first choice. They were like way down the totem pole of people who should have been leading an expedition, and it showed, right? So I didn't have the same problem with that only because of that, but I appreciate what you're saying.
Anyway, the inflection point that changed my mind, because it was just going downhill, right? And then when Captain Steubing, whatever his name was, right, like decides to kick his alcohol addiction, right?
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, wait. So not only is that a character trying to do a positive thing and trying to solve a problem, but it's also like the writer's not doing the laziest thing to spiral down. Because the obvious lazy thing was he just gets more and more drunk and makes worse and worse, orders and whatever. And they didn't do that. So I was like, okay, cool. Right?
Yeah.
So then I started getting more interested in the show, and it started seeming better. And there were characters that seemed to be trying to do, Dr. Goodsir. He's not really a doctor, but like wannabe Dr. Goodsir.
Yeah.
This is a funny show because there's 3 doctors in decreasing orders of training.
Yeah.
There's like actual doctor.
Yeah.
There's like kind of doctor, and then there's not at all a doctor, but would like to learn to help people. So,
but is the only one who actually has any initiative in terms of actually figuring stuff out. Like he's the one who does the experiment on the lead poisoning with the monkey. Like
that's middle doctor, right? That's Dr. Goodsir, or is there another doctor?
Dr. Goodsir is not a doctor,
right? But then there's the third guy. There's the guy who in like episode 4 or whatever is like,
just
I
says
would like to help out.
I'll fill in. Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's like doctor number 3.
Yes.
You can't really do anything.
Yes. No.
Yeah.
Okay.
I gotta turn off my air conditioning and grab a drink. So
all right.
Can you fill in for like 1 minute while I do this?
I can. Sure. So just to give folks who haven't seen the show a little bit more background then on it while John is turning off the AC. So essentially this show follows the Franklin expedition, which is 2 tall ships, right? They were exploration ships. They look a lot like what you would imagine like a 1700 ship to look like, right? Like a big thing with some big mass, but they're actually not. It's 1830s, and they have actual coal engines in them. So this was kind of like the time period where they still used like sail power to like sail around, presumably for efficiency. I guess I don't know much about seafaring, but because of the fact that they were trying to do like Arctic expedition stuff, they also had like a coal engine and a propeller on the back of these ships. So it's like a hybrid vessel, both sailing and prop. There are 2 ships. One of them is called the Terror. One of them is called the Erebus. The Erebus is actually the flagship, so it's the one who's leading. And the Terror is like sort of the ship that's the second in command. And in fact, there's 2 captains. So because each ship has a captain, and the captain of the Erebus is actually not in the show for very long. Spoiler warning, he actually bites it pretty early, which leads the captain of the Terror to be the captain for most of the rest of the expedition, because he has to basically be promoted. And that leaves the second in command for the Erebus as like the co-captain. I don't know what the correct naval terms are for these things, because it's not a rank, because one of them's like an admiral or a lieutenant, or I don't even know what they are. They have different.
Pretty different.
They have like totally random ranks, right? Because like the guy who's the next captain, he's a lieutenant, right? Because he's nothing. He was not an admiral, and he was not I don't even know.
Yeah,
I have no idea. But point being, in naval, parlance, obviously you have like your rank in the Navy, and then you have your rank on the ship, and those two things are not the same, and I can't explain them because I don't know what they are. But in terms of who's in charge, it ends up with the person who was the original captain of the Terror is now effectively in charge of the entire expedition. And now John is back, so we can continue.
Yeah. I will say I played Return of the Obra Dinn a year or two ago when it came out.
Go.
And that helped me understand the show a little bit. Because when they said Orlop Deck
I knew that's the only reason I knew what that was too. Yeah. Thank you, Lucas Pope.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, you said you were fine with totally stupid decision making. That was one of the things that bothered me consistently. Mm-hmm. So I have a bunch of notes about bad decision making, some of which I think is supposed to be bad. Like, it was written to be bad decision making, right?
Yes.
And some of it is Avengers Infinity War writing.
Okay.
Right? And I feel like both of those were, none of it was anywhere near as bad as like a Marvel movie, right? But I still felt like there was a bunch of that. So the decision making that was written to be bad that I thought was too stupid, and I would have liked it to be smarter because it would have been more interesting, is like, so in episode 1, they're making this decision to sail onward, right? And like Sir John, who's the admiral or whatever, wants to go, and Captain I don't remember his name. I said Captain Stubing as a joke, and that's all that comes to mind now. So Captain Stubing is like, no, we got to turn back.
Okay.
Yeah, Jared from Subway says, we got to go back, right?
Yes.
And Sir John's entire reasoning is, look, I want to find the Northwest Passage.
Yes.
We're basically like 2 weeks from finding it.
Yeah.
So it'll be fine.
Yeah.
He literally just says that like 3 times. Right?
Yes.
Whereas so something that would seem more realistic to me would be something like, hey man, you weren't in the meetings where we came up with the guidelines about where to go, when to go, and when to turn back. And I was there, and they have a certain amount of safety margin built in. And like, because we've, I've got experience here or whatever, it's fine.
Yeah.
And like that kind of rationalization about why it would be okay to go on would have made sense and would have sold it better, I think, right? Whereas like, we're going to find the Northwest Passage in 2 weeks. Like, they don't know if there's a Northwest Passage, right? Literally, they do not know.
Well, okay, so the reason I would disagree with that characterization is because I agree that that is a bad decision. And I mean, we know that that was a bad decision. And furthermore, we know that was a bad decision that they actually made. So the question is just, well, is it sufficiently motivated in the show? And while I'm certainly fine with an argument that it's not sufficiently motivated, because who's to say what's sufficient? I thought they at least spent a lot of time telling you why that happened. Because even though at that point in the show, you didn't have any information about why this guy is such a hard-headed idiot, in many future scenes, they give you his backstory in the court where they explain why he's just dead set on getting there that year, right?
I don't remember that. Maybe that was some dialogue I didn't understand.
So they have a bunch of scenes between him and his wife where he's talking about the fact that he isn't able to basically progress in society for reasons which they don't spell out like in detail, because that part of the show isn't like elaborate. It's just like flashbacks that you sort of see these like conversations for. Yeah. And basically they come to sort of the, not agreement, but where they leave it is that like, this is what's going to be what lets him get back into like an upwardly mobile path in society. And so like his reputation with his wife and his reputation in the Navy are all riding on him finding this passage. So while it doesn't really explain why he didn't do a better job of selling it, the amount of time they spent justifying it, plus the fact that he's supposed to be stupid. I mean, that was what I got from it anyway. Like he is the guy who made the stupid decision, the biggest stupid decision.
Yeah.
In reality, right? He can't be a very bright guy because a bright guy wouldn't have done this. I was fine with it. I was like, yeah, okay. Like he kind of just seemed like one of those like people who, you work for, if you work at like Intel or something, and you're just like, yep, this is an idiot VP, That's all.
I get that. It's just, and I don't mean to say that one thing stuck out especially much. It's just, I'm kind of picking it as an example of a pattern.
That's fair.
I will say that what I did like, I like some of the time cuts that they do in the show, right? Like, as far as I remember, the end of episode 1 is like they're arguing about this, right? And then episode 2 starts, and it's like 3 months later, and it's like frozen in the ice completely, and you're like, oh, okay, well, and that was interesting, and they do that in a little bit in the middle and the end, and I like that, but so there's kind of a spectrum, I guess, between like decision making that like is characters being dumb and decision making that's like writers not doing the thing that would obviously happen, and so part of it is a symptom of the way I think modern storytelling happens, especially for TV shows. And I don't know exactly how they wrote this, but what I think it was.
Well, don't forget, it's also a book, and there's an important caveat to include here, which is all the people have to end up in the right place, which is tough. There's graves, the people whose graves they are have to be in the right place at the end of it. The boats have to be in the right place. The lifeboats have to be in the right place. So there's a lot of constraints on this where you also had to meet. And so I'll put like...
Well, that makes sense too.
Anyway.
So that probably makes it harder. But the thing that I was going to say is the way even storytelling that doesn't have to comply with those constraints, right? Mm-hmm. The way it often works, especially in Hollywood movies, but also in TV shows and stuff, is they decide on like what the main points are of what they want to happen, right? Like first we want the characters to be here, and then we want this to happen, and this to happen, and that, and you have this set of things. Imagine it as like points on a 2D graph, right? And then your actual scenes in your shows are like how you interpolate between those points, right? And I think there's an inherent problem with that entire method of writing, which is it doesn't allow, or I won't say allow, but it doesn't encourage diversions from the interpolation, you know? Like
it's designed backwards, not designed forwards, as we've talked about before.
It doesn't encourage a certain kind of imagination to happen, right? Whereas if you were instead like, I don't know what's going to happen next, what would happen if these guys were in the scene? You would get ideas that just don't come the other way, right? And so that's what I felt like this show was early on. And now that you say that it had these constraints to meet, which I didn't know, that kind of makes sense, but this is also something that I've just seen in other writing as well.
Yeah, right? There's not a lot of excuse for this in like a Disney film or whatever. In this particular case, I do think there are some excuses. Now, to be fair, I don't know if they're actually legitimate excuses. I don't know if they got the locations of these things right? Like I didn't go check. So, but you know, because it's historical fiction, they do have a lot of constraints they have to meet. If they actually chose to be good about it. And again, it's also based on a book. So to what extent certain things are the fault of the book author versus the fault of the television show author, or whether, you know, the book could have been better and the TV show screwed it up. There's a whole bunch of things like that too that I couldn't speak to, because since I haven't read the book, I don't have an opinion. I'm also not an expert on the Franklin expedition. So, you know, I'm just throwing out some possible things here.
Yeah. So I have a few other examples from my notes that I took about things that I think fall into this category of bad decisions from people that sort of happened mid to late in the show, from people who were supposed to sort of be the competent people. Actually, two of them are sort of the Captain Stubing, right?
Okay.
So at the very end, right, we'll be a little non-chronological here. Yeah. At the very end, it's supposed to be this dramatic thing about how he's like, oh, tell them that I died, right? He tells the Eskimo guy,
right.
Tell them that I died, right?
Yeah.
Like, if this guy is supposed to be, he's been portrayed as being very responsible after he kicked his alcohol, right? Even before that, he was responsible. And then he got maybe driven to drink again by the disaster and then recovered. But he was always the guy trying to make good decisions and watching out for people and no man left behind and all that stuff.
Well, yeah, and to say made good decisions, maybe made noble decisions. There are possibly times when he could have made better decisions that would have had harsher sacrifices, for example. So, okay, so good Casey, is relative. But
when this next expedition shows up and the Eskimo asks, hey, Captain Steubing, what should I tell them?
Yes.
What do you think he should tell them, given his character?
What do I think he should tell them? To be honest, I've not thought about
the
that.
number one most important piece of information.
Where the Northwest Passage is?
The fucking cans are poisonous. Don't eat from those.
The lead cans.
Your entire expedition will go crazy if you like. He just doesn't give a shit for some reason.
Much like I would have forgotten about that. Much like he did. I don't
think you would forget.
In a year or 2 years or however long it was.
At the end.
What?
2 years later, it pops up on the screen.
Yeah, 2 years later.
Let's pick another one. One-legged coast guy, right? So the guy who like straps all the forks to himself to go fight. There's a monster in this, by the way.
Yeah.
To like, I guess the plan, it wasn't clear until you see it at the end, but I guess the plan was you tie a bunch of forks to yourself and then get eaten by the monster, and the forks will poke the monster on the inside.
Yeah, I mean, so here's one thing I'll say is by the time they get to that point in the show, everyone is supposed to be somewhat delusional.
We will talk about that in a minute. Okay, I understand this. Let me get to that.
So I don't actually know. One of the problems that so there's a couple of things that, since I have complaints with the show as well.
Yeah.
But I'd probably talk more about the things I liked about the show first before I talk about things I don't like about the show. But either way,
let's do that.
Okay.
I have a whole lot to say about the delusion part, so I want to leave that. And I do think it's good because that's very negative. So I do think it's good to talk about what we liked about the show.
Okay.
But let me finish this list because I've just got a list of 4 things, and then let's go to that. So this guy, he's out looking for the monster, right? And he like spots the ocean, and he writes like Northwest Passage on his map, even though it doesn't connect through, right? He's at least.
I didn't know what that meant. I had no idea what that was supposed to mean. He
saw the ocean. He had no supplies with him. He wasn't dragging a boat, right? He's within a walk with no supplies of the entire rest of the team.
Yeah.
There's probably fish in that ocean and shit, and like seals and stuff.
I guess. I don't know.
His number one duty as soon as that happens is to go back and fucking tell people.
Well, so there's a couple
and
of things.
He doesn't care.
So, okay, let me ask a question more broadly there.
Yes.
I wouldn't even necessarily say that part was bad decision or good decision. I would more say I didn't understand the ending. The series of events that happens at the end was not particularly scrutable to me in general. The reason for that was because at one point in the show, very near the end, there is a scene where one of the people sights a seagull.
Yeah.
Do you remember this?
Yes.
It's very specific.
Never spoken of again. Actually, no, there's 2, because one time, one guy from one of the teams spots it visually.
Yeah.
He's like, am I hallucinating or is there a seagull there?
Yes.
Other people see that. And then in the Hickey team, they mention it verbally.
Okay.
And I think the guy was in Captain Steubing's team, right? Who saw
the original guy cited it was in Captain Steubing's.
So they both saw birds.
Right. And so what I don't understand is nobody discussed or took action about that at all.
Follow that fucking bird. See where it goes.
It was stupid. Like you were saying, like stupid decisions. This was just a case of the show raising a point and then acting like they'd never raised it, and I didn't understand why. Like, am I supposed to believe that the characters are too adult at this point? Were they actually trying to follow the bird and couldn't? What is that not what was going on? So somewhere around that point, the show kind of like devolved for me in a way that I was like, it wasn't enough for me to say I don't like the show because I liked mostly everything that happened up to that point.
Yeah.
Well, but like the very end was kind of hard for me to swallow because I'm just like, it's not even just that I disagree with some of the things that happened. It's more like I just didn't understand. It fell apart in terms of connective tissue a little bit, and I was like, didn't really. I don't know. I feel like maybe what happened was like they've got the book and they're like going. They're putting the book into a show, And if you'd read the book, you'd know what happened after they sighted the seagull, and nothing comes of it or something.
But don't put it in the show, right?
But now in the show, I'm like, okay, but I didn't read the book, so I don't know what happened, right? And so there was a little bit of that anyway. So
yeah, I kind of like the way it became more disconnected at the end, but that's something we can talk about later too. But I want to come back to because I put in my notes, why didn't he run back and tell people about the coast? Oh wait,
and what was the seagull?
He's going crazy. Yeah. It's fine,
maybe.
Right? And
I guess.
Then the last weird bad decision. It's similar to the seagull thing, I guess. These guys they're still early. They're still at the boats, right? It's that part of the show. But they know they're having problems. They're going to have a supply problem. They're going to have a shelter problem, maybe, because one of the boats is like sinking and stuff. They know there's Eskimos around, even before they accidentally shoot the ones, right?
Right.
There's like the woman is there first, I think, right?
No.
It's it's her and her friend or whoever.
Her father.
Father. Right? Whoever it was.
I thought it was her and her father, and she got. He gets shot.
He gets shot, right. I was thinking later of the Mr. Hickey Eskimos, right?
Oh, they just, that's totally
But so initially, though, they know there's Eskimos around.
Yes.
You're trying to survive. Why isn't your number one plan, let's figure out where the frickin' Eskimos are and how they're surviving and what they're eating and try to do that? Like, that is like not even a thing in the show at all. You know what I mean? And they try to talk that off. They have an Eskimo scene where they try to talk that off, where the guy's like,
I'm not sure I know what...
too many of them, just like there were too many bears last year and whatever, right?
Wait. But why would that... They, at that point, don't think there's anything wrong with their food. So why would they care what the Eskimos
Well, they're talking about when the supplies are going to run out. They're already... Very early in the show, they're like, we have enough supplies to get to, like, summer. And if the ice doesn't thaw this summer, we'll be stuck here and have a problem. Like, they're saying that stuff, like, by episode 3 or something. You know.
But it's not really because of food. They have 3 years of food. So the problem is they're stuck there. They don't want to be there, right? They need to figure out a way to get somewhere else.
They had 3 years of food from the outset of the voyage.
Yes.
Right. Which it is very late in the voyage by this point or something, I think.
It's only like 1 year in. They have 2 more years of food.
There's an episode where they're still on the boats and they're talking about cutting people to 3/4 rations to make the food last.
Yeah, I thought that was because they couldn't use like the canned food or something. I don't know. That part is a little hard for me to understand necessarily because I wasn't taking notes, like I said, so I don't remember exactly. But at the point where they first encounter the Eskimos, they don't have they couldn't go a whole nother year without even being worried yet at that point. A lot of time passes in this show.
Maybe that's what happened. I don't know.
Anyway. When they initially... The first year of their journey, they get trapped in the ice, and that's when they accidentally shoot the Eskimo father and encounter the Eskimo daughter as a result, and try to save the father but fail, right?
Yeah.
That incident happens when they still have like 2 years of food left. It's only much later, much later, that they think they might run out of food at all. Like after John's already torn in half and thrown down a hole and all that stuff is...
Was that much later? I felt like all these things happened. Okay. So maybe I missed some time cuts.
No. I'm saying it's after that. That stuff happens in rapid succession. Most of those events happen. And then much later is the discussion about having to go down on rations. Right. Much later. Like after the guy kicks his alcohol habit and all those things happen, then way down the line, they're like, okay. Yeah.
So at that point, why are they not like, we need to do some Eskimo diplomacy? Like that's the number one thing.
That is what they do. That's what he says. He says, we'll get all our stuff. We're going to go south to where the Eskimos we think are and make contact with them. But then Mr. Hickey kills them, so they can't. That is exactly what he said the plan is going to be.
Okay, I just didn't understand
we're going to go
at that point.
Okay, then. He's like, we're going to go south because I know that's in the direction of where the Eskimos should be. At some point, we will hit them, and we will make friends, and we will live off of seals. That's what we're going to do. And then Mr. Hickey
totally didn't understand that.
That is what happened. So that was not a bad decision. That is, they were doing what you wanted.
Okay. Let's talk about what we liked about the show.
Okay. You want me to start? I don't know if you liked the show.
Yeah, go ahead and start.
I liked several things about the show. thing number one I liked about this show is there wasn't a lot of crappy acting. I know that's a weird thing to say about a show in 2020, but oftentimes the acting sucks in a lot of shows. So, thing number two that I liked about the show, and I liked a lot, is that it felt like, at least in the first few episodes, people were thinking pretty hard about most shots. Most shots looked good. They were lit well, they were framed well, and it wasn't just like we randomly shot some people doing some stuff and didn't care, like a Marvel movie. It was like, oh, if we put the camera here, we can frame this guy in a doorway down the deck, and he's supposed to be feeling that kind of claustrophobia at this point, so it makes sense that the shot looks this way. I felt like the people who were actually doing the production on the cinematography side cared about what this show looked like a lot of the time. Now, the CGI for the monster was horrible.
That was some Jurassic Park shit.
It was really bad. Yeah. So one thing that is a little bit unfortunate is I can't give the show an clean mark for looks gorgeous, because any time that you were supposed to see this creature, it really looked freaking terrible, with the possible exception of the very last shot where it's dead. That looked okay.
Even
but
that was
it was okay though. I was like, that shot was okay. I wasn't like, oh my god. Every other shot it looked absolutely terrible. And so oh well. But at least on the like traditional photography side, and on the side of like any CG they were doing to like put the boat in or the ice in, I didn't notice a lot of problems there. So the non-special effects, the stuff to just construct the environment, felt good too. So most of the time when I was watching this show, I was really enjoying what it looked like. And that's also pretty rare for shows. There's a couple of them. Better Call Saul comes to mind, for example, where I watched the show and I'm like, someone thought about every shot in the show. I don't see that very often, but this show was one where I was like, okay, this had like good production. So I really like those parts of the show, which leads into the third thing I liked about the show, because those two things are both really important for thing number three, which was most of what I liked about this show actually had nothing to do with the plot, because honestly, I could care less about the plot. Most of what I liked about this show is I felt like it did a good job making me feel like I was stuck on a boat in the Arctic, freaking out. Like, I just felt like the degree to which it, like, constantly kind of felt a little bit claustrophobic and, like, grim was just, it worked for me. I just, in much the same way that maybe you didn't like it because you were like, I think you used the phrase impoverished worldview to describe it.
Yeah, I'll say more about that later, but yeah.
In much the same way that you didn't like it, I think that part of at least some of that came off actually as a plus to me. I felt a little bit of the like suspension of disbelief during the watching of the show, where it just kind of felt like I was on this ship seeing some slices of these people's lives and it sucked, which is exactly what I would have imagined it would have been like if I was on that expedition, because I would be freaking out way worse than they were freaking out if I was in such a certain scenario. So most of what I liked about the show was those three things put together. Very competent acting, I thought, plus a good directorial cinematographer feel to most of it, with the exception of the monster part, added up to a good feel. I liked being in the world they were creating, and it was different enough from my world that I enjoyed that sort of like projection to another place. In much the same way that I never have this feeling about, say, frickin' like Star Trek or something, where it never feels like I'm actually out there in space or whatever. They never managed to cross that gap of making me feel like a day in the life of a starship. I feel like this show crossed that boundary, and that's not nothing, because it takes a lot of craftsmanship to pull that off at all, at least for me. So I really like that aspect of the show. What I didn't like about the show, I'll say briefly, and then we'll kick back to you and you can do the same, then we can expand, I suppose. Yeah. What I didn't like about the show was twofold. Thing number one was I would have preferred, especially because the CGI for the monster sucked, at the early in the show, they did sort of more Jawsian portrayal of the monster, which is You don't really know if there's really a supernatural monster or not in the show for maybe the first 3 or 4 episodes, honestly. It could just be like a polar bear or something out there that's like occasionally like snatching a dude when they're like not looking or something, right? And that part of the show worked really well, I thought. At a certain part, maybe around episode 5, like maybe the halfway point, I don't know, maybe a little earlier, it becomes very clear that it is not a polar bear or any kind of even plausibly super animal like Jaws was. I mean, obviously Jaws is a lot more capable than your average great white shark, but it's like clearly this like demon god thing that like hangs out with the Eskimo people and sometimes terrorizes them and or sometimes helps them, depending on whether their shaman is able to control it or something, right? So it's kind of a little bit mystical. That part, I thought, honestly, just straight up sucked. The reason I thought it sucked was because it goes against what I thought the show did well, which was making me feel like I was actually out there in the ice with the Franklin expedition. And when you start to tell me that, no, there's this weird Eskimo demon god hanging around doing stuff, that really, like, ruins that whole thing. And I would have been totally fine with, like, skating that edge of going the entire series never knowing if it was a polar bear or some weird supernatural demon god. That would have been fine. But crossing the line into, no, it's definitely a supernatural demon god weird thing, was not. That was my biggest complaint about the show. I have other minor complaints about the show, but that was my biggest.
Okay. I mean, I agree with a lot of the things that you liked about it. I did notice the cinematography being good, quite often. I do think... I mean, there's also sort of a problem with it. Like, I noticed the cinematography repeating itself sometimes, but it's like there's a lot of hours in the show. It's not like a 2-hour movie, so you kind of got.
And the budget is limited.
Yeah, and so it was more like, let's find the camera placement concepts that are going to work for this show, and we'll just sort of use them when they're appropriate.
Yes.
But they were good. The boats, especially in the interiors of the ships, were shot really well.
And the sets felt good too. Like, they didn't feel like a lot of the sets I see nowadays where it doesn't have the kind of level of detail that makes me feel like it's really there. Star Wars movies comes to mind a lot in this, where the sets just look empty and stupid nowadays. I feel like it looked like, okay, there's stuff everywhere, and it feels like someone was probably living there to a certain degree, right? And I liked that.
Yeah. I thought the acting was good to the extent that I could understand the things. Although in Between Two Ferns, as he asked Benedict Cumberbatch, do you think if you didn't have an English accent, people would know you were a bad actor or whatever? That might be happening, right?
It could be. I copped to that as well.
I liked the character design and, the costumes and everything.
Yeah.
Even down to little like, of course, when they're still relatively civilized and they're on the boat and they're wearing the more or less standard uniforms that people wear, there's just like touches to the costuming about like, oh, this guy's collar is this way or whatever the hell, right? Like that.
Yep.
That stuff was good. There were moments of the writing that I liked, like the example that I gave already about, not doing the obvious thing of the captain just becoming increasingly drunk or whatever.
Right. Or just having him become sober in 5 seconds, which is another thing they do. Like, he actually to go through a period of sobering up that was like long and laborious.
Although there's an interesting tension here. Like, there's a thing I really liked about the writing, and there's a downside to the thing that I like about the writing, right? So the thing that I like is, I like the time jumps that they do pretty often, right? Not sure about the ones at the end. We could talk about that later, but like the rest of them, I mostly like, and that's cool. The downside is it removes space for development and stuff, right? So there's character arcs that I pretty much like.
Right.
So for example, like James McJames or whatever that
he was great.
Name was. That guy,
really
he was
pretty
much my favorite actor in the show.
Yes.
That guy was really good.
And his character arc was good.
Yeah, and it was good, and it mostly comprised... like there were sort of two dimensions to his character arc, right? There's his relationship to Captain Stubing,
Yes.
and like hating him at first and then becoming friends with him, right?
Yeah.
And then there was like also in parallel with that, like his need to puff himself up and be and look pompous and or whatever, like present himself to other people as being above them or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And that was good, although like I think the writing sold that to me, but I might have liked to see more of that because I liked that part. And then the time jumps like skipped over a lot of it, but they did a good job given that those time jumps were there. The fact that they sold that character arc and it didn't feel bad or fake was good. That might be a great credit to the actor, maybe more so than the writing.
I think I would give it to the actor as well. And the reason I say that is because a lot of the backstory of that character is delivered in almost like straight expositional dialogue at the end.
Oh yeah.
In a scene that's actually quite good, but that should have come out more earlier in some other ways that help bring that together. And I would give the actor, who I've actually seen before, I just don't know his name. He did a fantastic job selling that, because that was literally expositional dialogue at the end, and he sold it as like a pretty serious character breakdown, and he did a fantastic job. But I mean, sometimes the acting compensates, right, for the writing not giving stuff as that said, and that's why it's so important, right? Yeah. Sorry to derail you. I didn't mean to.
No, I mean, I think those were the things that I like. Like, I agree with you a lot about the things that were good about the show. The thing that I didn't like that overrides all of that, right? Is sort of the thing, because I have a lot of complaints that I can go through here in the notes. That are all specific instances, but the reason they matter is they just sort of fit into this bigger pattern, I think, right? And
right, yeah. It's what they add up to that's presumably more important.
And here we have to get to the question of, like, why do you want to see a show in the first place, right? And the reason for you is probably a little bit different from the reason for me, right?
Yeah.
But there's something that I get, like, what do I get out of watching something that I appreciated watching and I'm glad that I watched, right?
Okay.
Usually it's like, I think of it as I'm like taking something with me in the rest of my life that I wouldn't have had, right? So the common pop culture idea of movies and film and whatever is that they're like escapism. Somebody spread this idea, like when I was a kid, that these things are escapism and people watch them because they let you forget about your stupid life and be somewhere else. And that's
one reason.
That's an
a
ingredient.
Reason.
Yes, but if that's all they were, I don't think they would be nearly as popular as they are. Like these shows.
Well, it's obviously not true, because you have many people, many times, saying things like, "I became a rocket scientist because I love Star Trek" or something. I mean, people say that stuff.
Yes.
Or I went into composition because I watched Star Wars. Like, that happens. So obviously, even if you want to take only the most superficial examples, these are clearly affecting people in a way that at least they believe has affected their life. Whether it's at a deep level or not is hard to say, but it's clear that self-reporting argues it is.
Yes. And so when I go to see a show, right, or a movie, I'm looking for something or for things. I'm not trying to get away from other things, right? So,
I see.
But it's hard to pin down what are these things that I'm looking for.
I see.
Because they could take different forms, right? But in general, in art, broadly speaking, there's a thing that happens when somebody just, does something amazing, right? And like, in some sense, that's what high art is. It's like you're trying to do that amazing thing, right? And, it's like very high art, like Michelangelo painting the Sistine Chapel or something is like, I'm going to do this huge, amazing painting, right?
So you mean literally high, like it has to be high up?
Yes,
on the
like
ceiling.
There has to be a ladder with a lot of rungs. No, there's this thing where, and like, why do artists do that? I guess because it's not the, like, there's a bad version of that where you're like just trying to do something that'll get a lot of people's attention or that's big or something. But there's like, when you're really making art that comes from a place of, you as the artist see something in the world that you regard as deeply interesting or very beautiful or like deeply engaging in some way. And then you're trying to illustrate that or embody that or explore that through the thing. Right.
Right.
And
yes, I understand what you're saying.
That's the thing that I appreciate most. And, you know, sometimes people don't quite know they're doing that. Like, or,
right.
You know, but, you know, so for example, when James McJames gives this really good performance, right?
Yeah.
He's drawing on something as an actor that a lot of actors don't have. And
sure.
Even though I don't know what that is, or I wouldn't be able to do it myself, I feel like there's something there, right?
Right.
That's
yes.
deeper than what a lot of other actors are doing, especially in that, or including in that show, but especially in a Marvel movie or whatever, right?
Yes.
And so there's a version of that for cinematography, right? There's a version of that for score, for all these things.
Yes.
And I felt like, and so for me, that's the line, right? If a show goes above that line in some ways, even if a lot of it is bad and sucks, I'll still appreciate the show. And so an example of that is Twin Peaks season 3. A lot of which
Twin Peaks, sorry. Okay.
A lot of it I cannot stand. A lot of it is just annoys me, right?
Okay.
Some of it is just straight up bad.
Okay.
But some of it is really deep and interesting and amazing, and you can feel that like he was making the show for those amazing parts, and the rest of it were just like he was doing whatever he could do to like get the rest of it together, you know?
Okay.
And so I appreciate it, even though I see all the flaws in it, right? And this show, I feel like is somewhere else on the spectrum where it doesn't have very much of that amazing thing that I want to see about the universe reflected in the art. It has a little bit of that, mostly probably brought by a couple of the actors.
Okay.
Especially that one actor. But on the technical level, it is relatively well crafted for the most part, except for you know, the monster CGI.
Well, the
like
monster, the monster was
And so it's kind of like the girl with the nice body who you don't want to marry because like, what would you say to her? Right.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Not exactly, because there's dimensions to that analogy that also are not appropriate. Like I'm not physically attracted to this series in any way either, but it's like,
what are you saying, John? You're saying that this movie was not erotic enough, is basically what you're saying.
No, well, it was very unerotic. This is one of the most unerotic.
It was the least erotic show.
This actually ties in. So there's a lot of like body horror in this show, right? There's a lot of like people are slowly decaying or like brutal things happen to people, and they have like close-ups of grisly things. And so first of all, I don't like that stuff. Broadly speaking, I'm very squeamish about that kind of thing. But I also just don't like it. And there's ways to do it that, again, I feel like, so like if you watch a David Cronenberg movie,
which I really unfortunately have.
Yeah. But he does it in a way where like he's somehow fascinated with that stuff in a way that he brings something to it. Whereas in this, it's like, we're going to show a deep in shot of this guy's, you know, big gaping wound, and that's going to gross people out. You know what I mean? It's kind of like, you know how Game of Thrones...
It's just literal. It's just very literal. Like, I guess what I would say is, in this show, like in the book, it's like, and the guy's head was torn open. Then when they shot it, they literally just said, okay, there's the guy with the torn open head. That's it. There's no, it's just literal.
In Game of Thrones, how, at least in the early seasons, did you not ever see it?
I've never seen it.
I stopped watching it once they switched to TV writers, but
Wait, what? Was it different writers?
Well, they were following the books for the early seasons.
Oh, okay.
And then they ran out of books, and they were like, "Oh, the TV writers will write the plot from now on." And then it was a disaster. I couldn't watch it anymore.
All right. Yeah.
But there was this thing in Game of Thrones where like they had to have boobs every episode, you know, or whatever, because like HBO was telling them. I felt like there has to be some gore every episode or whatever.
Okay. Well,
there were no women in this show, you know.
Well, there was literally 3 women in this show. No.
Well, yeah,
5.
there was
5 technically, if you count the 2 Eskimos who got killed at the end. But they don't have any speaking parts. Those 2, because most of that party gets killed. There's only 1 Eskimo in that party of 5 that even gets to talk, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, that's not really at the end. I think of that as the middle or whatever. But anyway,
it's like episode 8.
Is it? I don't know, dude. I just watched them all. Wait, it's episode 8 that Hickey shoots the Eskimo party.
He doesn't shoot
That's
them.
not true. Or no, stabs them or whatever.
Oh wait, no, he does shoot them. He shoots some of them probably. I don't know. You don't see it, so I guess I don't know what he did.
Oh no, actually, it's not Hickey. Like what?
It is Hickey.
No. Okay, so one of the dudes, the dude with the blondish hair, isn't he like saying, Hickey said this and that, and we had to shoot them or something? You know, one of them. Like, there's a point where he's explaining to Captain Stubing like what happened,
right.
but it all is off screen. You know?
But you don't know if he's telling the truth or not. You have no idea because that guy's in cahoots with Hickey, so he could be lying. I had no idea I didn't know what happened to the Eskimos other than they were killed by Hickey's command or by Hickey. I just don't know. Yeah. And then you see their bodies, so you know they actually were killed.
So let's talk about Hickey for a bit, right? He was one of the main characters, as I said. I really didn't like him both ways. There's a way that you're not supposed to like him, right? Because he's a bad guy. But also, either there's something about the acting or the writing or something that I didn't like, in the sense that, like,
I thought the acting was poor, personally.
So,
like it was not bad enough for me to not like it, but it was like on the low end for the show. Because
I feel like the actor had one trick, which was there's this one smile that he does, which is something like I'm smarter than everyone and I'm embarrassed to be around people who are this dumb or whatever. And he uses that like all the time. Yeah. And so I guess this guy is supposed to be, and this is maybe a problem that I have with the writing too. He's like supposed to be really smart. He's supposed to be like a sociopath of some kind.
Definitely a sociopath.
He's supposed to be good at manipulating people, but I feel like he's also supposed to be smart or something.
Maybe.
He doesn't really ever do anything smart, except
not really.
He does know one thing, which is that if you get people to eat something bad, they're now guilty and are complicit. He does that in if you eat the captain's dog, you're now guilty and can't really be on his side or whatever. Right. And the same thing with people later on in the show. But other than that, like I wasn't sold on the character. He was just like the character who got to keep doing stuff for no reason.
Yes,
for no talent of his own,
I would agree with that, and I didn't necessarily. So I didn't have a problem with any of that plot, in the same way that I have problems with Disney movies where the whole movie sucks and it's horrible. Yeah. It was not. I did not have those feelings about it, which maybe you sort of did a little bit. The feelings I had about the part where, like, literally 8, 9, 10 is what I think, where I think of it as being in the series.
Yeah.
It turns into a little bit of a, like, Hickey versus Captain Stubing thing, and I just don't care about that. I didn't think it was interesting, was my problem. And it was less about whether I was finding it believable or not, and more about much like you were pointing out, James McJames being the sort of high watermark of the series' is sort of like character emotion depth. Yeah. That scene. I just wanted more of that. Like, I just wanted to see how these various people, including Mr. Hickey, who doesn't need to become some kind of a criminal mastermind for this show to finish with everyone dead, as far as I'm concerned, because they'll probably just die anyway.
Yeah.
I just kind of wanted to see them face down their eventual demise in a relatively emotionally satisfying way. And the fact that they chose to introduce a sort of higher stakes spy versus spy plot element to the last 3 episodes, to me, just felt like taking up a lot of screen time with stuff I just don't care about.
Well, and also,
like, I just fundamentally did not care.
There was this weird thing that didn't make that much sense about it, right? So at first I thought the plan was, right, Hickey grabs a team full of people and steals the stuff. And he says early on, like an episode or 2 before they actually do it, he's like, grab the map that shows the way to whatever, and then burn everything else. Right? Now, okay, the weird thing is that team is not the people who... So this is a little off the topic, but like they burn down the carnival, but it's not one of the dudes on that team who does it, right? I thought it was like
burning down the carnival happens way earlier than this.
No, because I thought they were burning down the carnival, and then the monster shows up at the end of that, right?
No, you're thinking of when they're going to hang them, and they're in a big dust cloud.
Oh no,
that's right. Shows up. It's totally, it's way later.
I was mixing those up.
A month later or something,
Right. So they don't get to burn anything in that case because they're just like, we're getting the hell out of here, right?
Yeah. That's why nobody ever actually burns the maps. I don't even know what they ended up getting for maps. That was not clear.
Okay, but the point being, I was led to believe, at least by the show, or maybe by me not being able to understand Canadian, that they thought the captain's plan was not that good, so they were going to go somewhere else, or maybe just in a smaller party, right? But I figured
the whole point was they thought they could go faster as a smaller party, and then they didn't
go any faster, right?
Yes.
First of all, and so there was no like real discussion. So that was weird. It's like, and you can see why this happened, because they need, for the purposes of the writing, the two parties not to be separated. Right. Because if they do separate completely, then it becomes a really weird show, right? Yeah. And so they had to not let that happen, but that was really weird and artificial.
But if I may step in here for a second.
Yeah.
I disagree, not with any of your analysis, which I 100% agree with, but rather with your quick conclusion at the end there that they needed them to not separate. I disagree. I would have much preferred this show where they separate and never interact with each other again. That would have given me exactly what I wanted, which is the ability to see how these two sets of people face down their eventual demise. I don't need them to have this conflict. And I think the fact that the writers thought they had to make a traditional climactic ending to this show was exactly what ruined the ending for me, because what I liked about the show through the first 7 episodes at least was that wasn't happening. There wasn't a lot of traditional cliffhanger-y stuff, and I thought sometimes I don't have a problem with that. I like that kind of show too, but this type of show was, let's just show the life on this ship and how it's working, and I love that. It was very much, to me, it was not as good as Mad Men, but it was a similar type of show. It's like Mad Men is just some people at an office living their life, and we don't feel the need for every series episode to have a certain amount of conflict and a certain amount of resolution. It's just sometimes shit happens, and that's fine.
Yeah,
that's working really well in this show. And when it turned into at sort of that point that you're talking about, when it turned into we have to engineer this stuff to be a conflict, that's, I think, what really fell apart for me.
I agree that wasn't a good decision. It would have been a braver writing decision to have them stay separated. Yeah. I do think they're maybe hamstrung by some other things. So if I were going to do that, if I were going to try to write that, one way to do it might be, hey, let's try to contrast the groups, right?
Exactly.
Like, how do they handle various situations? And some of those are just, well, sort of, right?
Because James McJames says, I'm dying anyway. Just feed me to the other people. Just eat me, and you'll stay alive. and Captain Steubing's like, no, we're not going to do that. Whereas the other guy's like, we should eat this dude. Right. So they literally did exactly the thing I wanted them to do, but they only did it once. And then the rest of it was this big machinations plot with a goddamn Eskimo demon monster.
Yeah. So it would have been much better to make a pattern out of that. Right. Yeah. And then how do you, so one way that you do it is by, having the clock tick down kind of like it was, but they were a little bit hamstrung by the setting. Like if you imagine this was like Game of Thrones or some fantasy world or whatever, and both parties are trekking to Mordor, right? You would have like, they're in the cliffs and then they have to sneak through the wolf den and then whatever. And you see how they handle, you would like the setting would naturally give you something to work with as a writer to do that. When the terrain is a vast plain of nothing, as it sort of had to be for the show, that doesn't give you anything to work with, right?
But you don't really need it because it's about the interactions between the characters. So you just have to create. I mean, you've seen this happen through the entire show. It's about two ships that get stuck in the ice. Literally nothing happens on this show. I mean, let's be honest. Yeah. If you took out the demon monster, there isn't really a lot happening. It's about interpersonal conflict and decision making. All you had to do was just have them be making decisions like, do we eat people? Do we try to look for seals? Do we try to do this? How do we interact with the natives? Whatever it is, right? Like, that's not that hard at the end of the day because they've been doing it the entire series and then they gave up. Mostly, I think, intentionally. Like, they wanted to make this weird, like, conflict-oriented ending, and I just don't think it was the right decision for this.
I agree with that. Like the split up can go very bad. Like Battlestar Galactica season 1 had like Hilo on Caprica for the whole season.
I don't think I think I only saw the first 4 episodes of that show.
Yeah, so it was real bad. But like you said, the structure of how do these groups deal with these similar problems would have tied it together and been good.
Yes,
and
I think that's where I would have gone with it.
Instead, what they did kind of sucked. But anyway, so I thought the plan at first was do this thing, but then later the plan is I'm going to offer up my team to the monster and then try to take it over, right?
It was that's very strange. Very strange.
And so at some point that appears to have become the plan or was all along, because they did, like even early on when they're trekking away, they're like trying to sight and track the monster, right? But it's weird because if they're trying to go toward the monster, why are they going the same direction as the other team for like weeks, right?
It's very weird. I didn't like that. And I also thought that my assumption is that there's a fair bit of like, it's the book or not the book happening there where it's like, okay, obviously what happened is somehow Hickey knew some of the stuff that the girl Eskimo, Silna, I think her name was.
Yeah.
It's actually someone whose name I remembered. Hickey and Silna. So Hickey knew some of the stuff that Silna knew. Like Hickey specifically cut off his tongue to feed to the monster, which is what Silna did.
Well,
but I have no idea how he knew that.
Exactly right. So he somehow figured it out off screen. So everybody knew that the original Eskimo guy didn't have a tongue. The guy who was shot, he might have even been there when somebody said that.
Yeah, so just like Hickey kind of like put that together, but how did he know that's what he should do? Or
that's the thing, right?
I don't know. Like,
so it's he's supposed to be smart by observing. You know, he makes these hammy faces like he's observing things, right, and noticing things.
Sorry, I just had to close my windows there. Keep going.
Yeah. So, you know, they try to direct him to like be like he's noticing stuff around the camp or whatever. So it's plausible that off screen he put these things together, which again leads toward like, oh, this character is supposed to be smart. But how dumb do you have to be to think that if you don't know all the Eskimo lore, controlling a magic beast is going to work? Like you wouldn't, right? Yeah. And of course the answer is no, he's crazy, right? Which okay, let me get to that, because this is the thing that I like the least about this show. People in the audience may not know, both myself and Casey have written fiction before, right? Not TV shows or anything, but I wrote some short stories.
How did you write a TV show?
Yeah. I wrote some short stories back when I was in college that actually appeared in paper and ink magazines back when that was a thing. And Casey wrote a book at one point.
Well, two actually.
How long ago was that now?
I don't know.
Okay.
10 years?
Is it? Oh my God, dude. Anyway, so we both wrote stuff. So we both thought about writing probably more than it might come across, right? Like I used to think about writing all the time. I don't as much anymore. So when I was young and in college and trying to write stories that were like profound or felt cool or whatever, right? I was like 18, right? So I don't really know that much about what's profound or is actually good to write and whatever. And there were tendencies that I found myself trying to do, right? That I notice in other people's early writing as well. And they're kind of just weak cop-outs, right?
Okay.
So among the weak cop-outs are protagonist kills himself at the end, right?
Okay.
Because that's a dramatic ending punctuation, right?
Right.
For example, Darren Aronofsky's film Pi does this.
Right.
And it's stupid, right?
Right,
It's like
right.
just not a good ending.
He doesn't kill himself. He just drills a hole in his head.
Okay. But basically...
He's still alive.
I don't know about that.
What do you mean you don't know about that? He's literally sitting on a park bench at the end of that film talking to someone. They clearly showed that he was fine.
I have a different interpretation of that scene, but anyway.
Okay,
this is not. We can go rewatch Pi.
Yeah, we're gonna have to now.
God, the thing about the 216-digit number drives me nuts in that movie.
Oh, I hate that movie. I thought that movie was absolutely terrible. But
it's a math movie written by someone who doesn't know math. But
that's a very good way to say it.
Let's get back to the. I actually like Aronofsky mostly. That movie bothered me. So, where the hell was I before I was complaining about that?
Well, you were talking about well, I guess I don't know exactly what you're going to lead up to, but perhaps...
writing, weak cop-outs in writing. Okay, one of them is your character kills himself at the end. If you grew up on Marvel Comics, probably the Marvel version of this is the world's going to end and or does, right?
Right.
You know, I once wrote well, we'll skip that. So another thing that young writers, I think, do a lot is like our character is just, he's going insane and that's so dramatic, right? And like all sorts of crazy things can happen because he's insane, right? And if you decide that people are going insane, it's sort of a get out of jail free card for anything, right? Like, why did Mr. Hickey think that this would work, that he would hold the tongue up and the thing? Because he's going insane, right? Yeah. Why did Mr. Forks not go back and tell them about the water? Because he's going insane, right? Why did Mr. What's his name, Arsenic, Mr. Good Sir Arsenic himself, and then have people eat him, even though that didn't really affect the plot because the guys didn't really get sick enough for it to matter?
No, that seemed good.
Because he's going insane. Like,
all right, I wouldn't agree with that part, but okay.
I mean,
for sure, yeah.
Like, I sort of get why he would. Let me put it this way: if it didn't fall into the bigger pattern of all these things not really being like that one, could work, but it's just like this, like, it's too much.
My main complaint with that was just that the show knew how to do it well and chose not to, is the way I would say it. You can portray characters going mad by having them be more aware of it. Like James McJames's character, like voices his concerns and his troubles as he progressively declines from the lead poisoning, and it works great. That is what should have been happening to everybody. And also there was another character who literally just goes mental and he's just running around screaming. That's great too, because that's like, it's not excusing anything. It's just like, no, there's some people going legitimately crazy here. And it feels proper when you do that. The rest of the characters, either they were trying to use they're going slightly crazy as a cop-out, or the things that they did were actually not supposed to be crazy. They were just supposed to be things that the characters actually thought they should do, in which case it just isn't very good because it just didn't make a lot of sense, like you said.
Yeah. So basically, I'm trying to say, though, I think the crazy thing is basically a weak crutch completely. Like, the version of this show that would have been better, writing-wise, is, hey, a lot of the cans of food are spoiled.
Yeah.
It's not mystery lead poisoning crossed with botulism, crossed with evil that makes you go crazy and makes your body turn black or whatever. It's just they're spoiled, so we can't eat it, right? And
well, they can't really do that because we know they actually got lead poisoning. So,
okay, whatever. But like,
sure.
lead poisoning doesn't make bullet wounds that have been healed for 15 years like suddenly open up and whatever. Like, that's not what that is. You know,
I don't know anything about lead poisoning. I can't help you there.
Anyway, like the version of the show that would have been better writing wise is like yes, people like the mini society of the shipwrecked guys decays until everybody's like fiercely fighting each other and stuff. But it happens for regular human reasons, like disagreements and they do that sometimes, right? Like, I think we should leave the men behind who are sick. Yeah. No, we're not going to do that. Yeah. But yes, but no, right?
Yeah.
And then the guy later, and he's like, we're gonna go fucking attack the other camp, and they're like, but there's been a vote and we didn't, right? That kind of thing should have been the driver behind all major events. Not this guy went crazy and did this thing, right?
Correct.
Or the other thing that could be a big driver of events is just like accidents. Like early on when it's very Obra Dinn-like, I liked some of the things that were happening. Like the guy climbs up on the mast to get away from the monster and they're trying to shoot the monster with the cannon. And I'm like, oh shit, they're going to shoot the guy. And they actually didn't. But like that kind of thing, like when there's pressure on and stuff is happening, like when the first Eskimo gets shot, right? Like that kind of thing is believable and
or
doesn't
they had a nice
rely on everybody's going crazy.
The guy in the diving suit going down and knocking the ice away, and then it turns out the propeller's bent, so now we have to change. Like small things like that just add up over time to like having to make major changes feels really good. Did you see Sunshine?
No.
Sunshine?
No.
I can't say I recommend it because there's a lot of things that are not good about the movie. It's a Danny Boyle movie. But the one interesting thing that I will say about this movie is that like the entire movie is about the fact that someone does a slightly off calculation on where to set a particular sun deflector shield on a spaceship in the future. And the whole movie is basically downwind of that. And I was like, that sounds, like you say, like a much more plausible thing to happen in science fiction, is that like you just make one small mistake, and because there's so many things dependent on that in something like space travel, you've got a shit ton of stuff to deal with downwind all of a sudden that you didn't have to before, right? So
yeah, and I don't think it's exactly plausible that I'm saying, but just like better. Like it's more meaningful if it's about humans.
It's interesting. It's more interesting.
But it's more like this applies to me in some way if it's about somebody making a mistake or having too much of a grudge with somebody in a way that going crazy from lead botulism doesn't apply to me. Right. Although that could happen, it's like not something, there's a way that it's just more meaningful.
I agree.
So that is my biggest issue with the show, actually.
I would also contrast it back with Marvel because they're a popular punching bag already on this stream.
Yes.
And say like, this is also why I literally could not give a shit about Infinity Stones. It's like, I just don't fundamentally care about arbitrary crap that has to get collected for some reason. Like, it's just not very interesting because it doesn't actually have any actual understandable consequence to the people watching, right? Like, 100% of the stuff that will happen has to be explained to me. Whereas, like, the types of things that we're talking about here, they're nice and tangible. I get what you mean when you say that, oh, the propeller got bent, so we have to switch to this ship. Or like, I can I can grapple with that, and it makes me feel like I'm actually understanding the stakes from day to day. Whereas if you're just like throwing crap at me about what generally is happening right now because you've made it all up and none of it is logical or consistent, I'm constantly just going, okay, if that's what if you say so, right? And we're on to the next thing. So it doesn't give me as a viewer any time to really anticipate or worry or even feel relief, because I don't know what's going on really. Like, I only know what's going on after you've told me what happened instead of before, which is the time when I want to know. I want to have expectations about what might happen before it does, because that's like a crucial part of the drama to me. And, you know, in a Disney movie, you literally have no idea what could or couldn't happen because the writers had no idea and they just wrote something down that's completely impossible. It breaks all the rules they've set up before. So there's never any sense of drama or tension because you're like, well, literally anything could happen in the next scene. So I'll just wait and have them tell me, right? And so I do think that one of the really nice aspects about what you're talking about as far as looking at small things is it's a good way in the writing to get tangible, understandable stakes that people can form like a mental model of and invest in, right? Because you have to be able to get into the story somehow before it can really have an effect on you emotionally or anything else, really, at least for me. And I find that there's a lot of barriers to that when it's just all this arbitrary stuff.
Yeah, there's a related but different thing, switching sort of to the way that I view movies, right? Which is when you build a plot around, we have to get the MacGuffin or like the 5 Infinity MacGuffins or whatever, right? That's it's an easy way that you get to play Mad Libs with the plot, right? It's like you have this and this and that, and we just have to fill in the blanks. Kind of like what I was saying about interpolating between points early on, right? It's a well-known, easy structure for that. And then you think your job as a writer is to just fill those in and then you're done, right? And the problem with that is that's every other movie, right? And so if I'm looking for special insight, if I'm looking for something especially interesting or especially beautiful or especially intelligent, right? It's probably not going to be a Mad Libs movie, in part because the process of making one of those Mad Libs movies is not going to generate that, in part because the people who have those insights are not going to want to make fucking Mad Libs movies, right? So maybe they can't make movies in the modern environment. But in part also because sometimes you break those things in the process of trying to fit them into the frickin' Mad Libs, right? You like break off what's special about it, which I even have to worry about when making games. And it's something that I'm tend to be very worried about.
Well, I guess I would push back on that slightly. And the only reason I say that is because maybe that's true from the standpoint of if your goal is only to ever make movies that are transcendent in that way. Like the way that you're describing that is spiritual is probably the wrong word, but it's like kind of similar. It's like you're actually asking for something that's sort of more like a spiritual communication where you're saying, here is something deep and meaningful, and I'm communicating it via film because that's like the medium that I understand how to work with or something. But that's definitely a higher bar than competently made show.
Yeah, but I don't mean to push it quite that far. Like that's the dimension that I appreciate the most, right? And that's the kind of thing that I try to do, right? But there are other things that I wouldn't say fall into the spiritual category that are still that I appreciate. So for example, like, you know, a classic thing to do in movies is the impressively long single shot where a bunch of cool stuff happens. And at that point it's more like you're doing an Olympic dive or something, right? Where it's like, it's a very impressive thing to do.
Gotcha.
And I appreciate those too. Like sometimes I don't have enough education to appreciate those as fully as I should, but I do appreciate those in a certain way. I do think they can be empty, but sometimes in the act of being maximally good at a thing, you generate something beautiful in that act, right? Even if that wasn't your intention. You know what I mean? So like if you watch the best dancer in the world do a dance or something, right? something is embodied there, even if they're just doing the thing that they know and they're just like, I'm going to go out and like do my things that I've been practicing 20 years or whatever. Right. Anyway. But so it just, I don't find that stuff usually in these movies. Right. And movies are written increasingly in this way where it's just like filling in the blanks, you know, and I see the blanks and then I see the thing. It's like, you know, when you see a Mad Libs page, it's like there's the typed out words and then there's the blanks and you like pencil in. Yeah. I can see the pencil and the typed out words and the blanks in all of these movies. Right.
Yeah.
And I don't even make movies. So I don't know how people who watch movies can possibly, or who make movies can possibly watch them or TV shows.
Well, I guess, so two things about that. The first thing I'll say about that is that I think you may actually be giving, you know, at least the Disney side of things too much credit by calling it a Mad Libs movie, though, because that assumes that you actually wrote out some of the words ahead of time. And based on the limited experience I had watching their making of documentaries on Disney Plus, because I was curious about exactly this question, I was like, why is the writing in literally all Disney movies horrible? They don't even have like major plot elements. They don't even know them until like many scenes have completed, like production.
Well, that happened with Star Wars for sure. Right? I don't know about other movies.
This was, I think the one that I remember this specifically from was Frozen 2. So just a random, you know, massive hit animated one that they did, right?
Yeah.
And it was just like, it was weird because you literally will watch, if you go watch that documentary, which don't bother, but like if you did, you would see literally there is like a scene where there are a bunch of people, the director, writer, the co-director, and like multiple people on the production team are literally sitting around a table. They are maybe 6 months or a year away from finishing this thing. So tons of scenes have already been animated. Like, I mean, it is way in the process. They're talking about whose voice the character's been hearing for the entire film. And I'm like, you wrote, directed, and animated half of this film, and you don't even know basic things about the story you're claiming to tell. I'm like, I don't know if that's the height of irresponsibility or some kind of new like Jackson Pollock style, like we let the paint fall on the canvas movie making, but it was really horrific to me.
That's another Battlestar Galactica right there.
Okay. So, but putting that aside, what I was going to say was, my criteria for enjoying a film or a movie, despite the fact that I more or less have the same experience you do, which is like I find it incredibly difficult to watch a lot of movies these days because they seem to be written so poorly and made so poorly. Actually, one of the interesting things, at least about Marvel movies, is the cinematography is absolute garbage from start to finish, which is a really odd thing too, because blockbusters used to be more about that. But one of the things that I would say when I go to the movies is I actually just want a completely made movie. I don't actually need something special in the film. Like I am totally happy if you literally, like, I just enjoy watching movies in general. And if you just show up and do a competent job, right? Yeah. I am like really happy about that. But increasingly, like in general, I just don't think that the competency level is there anymore. The writing is usually terrible. So bad that like literally from scene to scene, it doesn't make sense. Like the two, you know, like you'll just get major things where you're like, that can't happen. Yeah. And you didn't care, right? Like
well, you know, right? There's common classes. And I think we've talked about this before, but I'll say it for the stream. There are common classes of things that movies do all the time that are like obviously just terrible writing, and obviously writers just don't care, right? There's like the plan that somebody has that only makes sense if they knew what somebody would do like way later. Right?
Yes.
There's plans that only make sense if you don't think about what happened, you know, if you don't think about what a character actually would do, and instead that character does the thing that's necessary for the plan to make sense. You know what I mean? Like,
well, I would say that even talking about plans is getting ahead of
yeah,
ourselves.
that's a big, yeah.
Nowadays,
No, well, there's entire scenes that like don't make sense if you think about 4 minutes ago in the movie, right? But
dude, forget all of that.
Yeah.
I'm just talking about, like, literally there will just be characters who they wanted two characters to like have a conversation or something, so that character just shows up. And you're like, that person literally had no idea where any of this was or that it was taking place, and they just show up, right? It's like they literally don't even care anymore. And one of the interesting things about this is, just so I knew I wasn't crazy, I've been paying attention to old blockbusters.
Yeah.
And I defy you to find many instances in the classic blockbusters of the era. And I'm not even talking about like Jaws or something. I'm talking about like Home Alone or something. Like, pick any blockbuster that you wouldn't even put in the pantheon of like classic filmmaking. They went out of their way to have scenes that explain how various people got from one place to another, or why they were there, right? Like, that actually was a thing that always happened.
Yeah. Nobody cares about that anymore.
Nobody cares. They're just like, nope, they're just there.
Yeah.
It's just people are wherever they need to be. We don't care if they couldn't have known or couldn't have gotten there. They're just there.
All right. Let me go. I made a few notes about things in this show that I felt like the writing really didn't sell. And I'll say what they are. And then you can tell me if you disagree. Right?
Sounds good.
And you can violently defend them or undefend them. The thing that I thought was the most absurd, and they tried to sell this in several different ways, right? And none of it worked because it was so absurd, was the fire that burned down and trapped everybody in the carnival, right?
Right. So
they're out on the ice. Well, before he even the doctor burning it down is one thing.
I didn't know why he did that, really, to be honest with you.
Because he's crazy.
I guess, but he wasn't really.
But he was just keeping it inside. I think the implication, like, only in retrospect, I didn't have a hint of this at the time, but I think the implication was when the dude came in and was telling the doctor how he couldn't handle it anymore.
Yeah.
The implication is the doctor had gone along that whole path and was further, but he had just such a curt demeanor and was so good at keeping things buttoned up.
Okay.
And the reason that he was recommending the guy to go to the carnival was not, oh, you can chill at the carnival, but like, look, I will kill you.
Maybe.
And everybody else if you go to the carnival, and will end your suffering, right?
Yeah.
But I only can ascribe that meaning in retrospect. I don't feel like there was very much. But anyway, so it's just so absurd that like somehow with like a day of work, they made an impregnable fortress out of like bales and stuff and all this. And the TV trope of like alcohol being super flammable being used to set this whole place ablaze, and nobody else noticing that enough alcohol was being poured out, despite the fact that it was full of people, and like the skins and cloths and stuff like not being wet, despite the fact that it was freaking snowing all day, right? Like,
the other part
they wouldn't really burn.
No steam anywhere. It's a fire on an iceberg.
Yeah,
and there was
on an iceberg. And like somehow people are stuck in this maze of stuff. Like, it didn't make any sense, right? They tried in a few ways. They had it built up against ice cliffs for some reason. So that was like one wall. And then on their way in, they're all like, how did they manage all this? And there's like, they're walking through a little weird maze of bales or something. But like, it's still, there's no way. Like, that is definitely a thing where writers sit down and they say, how do we have a disaster that kills a lot of dudes, right?
Well,
now, that would have made way more sense. There was a different time. So remember when they were on the boat and like the hatch was iced closed and they couldn't get it open? If the boat like freaking burned down, that would be way more believable, right?
Yeah.
Than like this thing that they built out on the ice somehow burned down. That didn't make any sense. It was
two things about that though. One, did very many people die? Because I didn't actually think that many people died.
I believe some did. Okay, so there's a guy who got stabbed actually, which I thought was not too bad. Although
that was cool.
I
like
think
that.
if I were in that case, I would have started up, right?
Yeah,
Felt for slack. But okay, there's that guy. At least a couple. They give a tally of like some people who burned.
Either way,
It was like at least 5 people. But
my complaint with this is, again, really has nothing to do with that. My complaint with it is I don't care. That was, again, my problem. It
didn't have anything to do with anything.
It really didn't have anything to do with anything. It didn't set up or resolve any. My main thing with writing that I want to see is I like for the things in the plot, to the extent that you're going to have a plot, it should be there to create scenes where interpersonal or personal things are brought to fruition. Now, sometimes if you're doing like maybe if it's a Ted Chiang piece, it's not about the people, it's about the science fiction or something. And I would relax that constraint and say, okay, you're trying to do some like science stuff, so people are secondary. Fine. Yeah. But the vast majority of the time, I want you to mostly be using the plot as a mechanism to create the interesting character dynamics that will make for scenes that are good, right? I mean, some of my favorite films are, might be ones that have almost no plot at all, like Pulp Fiction, where 100% of the things that happen are just to create interesting scenes. It's not, nobody cares what the actual like outcome of this series of events is in a like vanquishing good and evil big plot thing. It's just like, no, it's like we're trying to create all these interesting scenes where people do interesting things. That's the point. Burning down the carnival seemed a complete waste of time because I didn't care, and it didn't really even affect the future in much of any way at all. And so the only thing I can think of that might excuse this is, again, I don't know if one of the constraints is we found ruins that is a burned down carnival, and so we have to freaking explain that somehow, right? And if that's the case, I'll give them a buy, because it wasn't like completely implausible that maybe somebody kind of like decided to burn things down, but like they could have done a lot better.
Yeah. Well, so like you said,
if it wasn't the case, like if they didn't have to hit that, if that wasn't a target, then I just don't think that should have been in there, because it didn't. If there's to just have the carnival and take it down, it doesn't need to burn down for any particular reason.
Yes. So what you said about it should have been about the people. Yes. Is right. And they kind of tried to set that up in two ways, right? So they tried to do the doctor thing, which again was weird and didn't really sell. Maybe in the book that was a thing. I don't freaking know, right? Yeah. The other was like, this was like James McJames was acting captain because Captain Steubing was drunk, right? Or recovering from being drunk.
Yes.
And
was in rehab.
Yes. So he was talking to his sergeant or lieutenant or whatever the hell it is it's not a sergeant in the Navy, but like the guy's like, look, the men, if they're going to go on this voyage, they need morale, and morale is already bad. So you got to get morale up. Right. And so that was an abstract concern.
Yes.
And then so you would, if this were a video game, the penalty for the carnival failing would be to put your morale below where it was initially. Right. It's like risk reward, right? Like success brings the morale up, failure brings it down below, right? Yeah. Or maybe somehow a charismatic leader turns that into some new energy. Like, yes, things are bad, but we're going to have grit and whatever. And it's sort of the opposite of that. Like the captain, before it burns down, I guess, the captain starts doing this speech that's kind of a downer and ruins the carnival, right? Like, let the fucking carnival finish, right? You're ruining the carnival, you idiot. And then it burns down, and then it's just the failure of this abstract concern that has no consequences, because then they just go and they're just going, And that's not even why this other faction happens, because the other faction was already there. Like, you maybe could make the case that more people went to that faction because of that, but like they didn't do that. Yeah. They didn't sell it. So
it feels like, I mean, there were a couple points in the TV show, and this was one of them. It definitely felt like, to me, it was perhaps something that happened in the book that made a lot more sense in the book because there was more contextualization to it. Yeah. And a lot of that stuff was probably not in the show. And then you still did the thing. I felt like, so this, by the way, is how I felt like watching Harry Potter movies is I'm like, none of this makes sense. I'm imagining that most of it maybe made more sense in the book. I hope, but like you cut out a bunch of the things that would have been required for this to make any sense. And so now you're just doing the thing that has to happen now, but I don't know why, right? And this kind of felt like that to me. That might not be what it was, but that's what it felt like.
I only saw a few Harry Potters. Can I explain to you why Harry Potter deeply offends me? I haven't read the books. I've seen a few of the movies.
Some of the movies.
It offends me because it is a thing. It's a series about magic. Yeah. Where magic is basically about being a script kiddie, right? Like what you learn what they somehow spend all year learning in school is that you wave the wand and say the particular words and then the spell happens, right? So it's basically you open the shell and you type the command and that's the magic. You don't know how to write the program that you're invoking, right? Yeah. You have no freaking idea. Yeah. It's just you say magicus ignoramus.
Yeah.
And the thing happens. Yes. Right. And also there's a sport where if you catch the bird, everything else that every other player did for the whole game is invalidated. That's a bad sport.
Hold on. That I take issue with.
Okay.
I might take issue with both of them, actually. Are both things a terrible idea? Yes. Are they both very accurate to modern society? Yes. So if the education system for magic is similar to our education system in the real world,
that's exactly what it is.
That's what happened. They would never teach you anything about how magic works. They'd just be like, install Perl, and then you do some stuff. Go to this GitHub page and download it. TensorFlow. Build it after 6 hours, type some stuff in, right?
Yep.
That. And then 2 would be, that's exactly like the weird game design. Like they designed Quidditch originally and it was like you score points by getting the ball in the goal, but then they were like, that's not tense enough because someone could get up like 7-2 and now no one has to watch past the commercial breaks anymore. They just turn it off. So like, what if we introduce a golden snitch, which makes it so that you have to watch to the end of the stupid broadcast or whatever because someone at any time could catch that thing.
Okay,
right?
I hadn't thought of that angle, the commercial television angle.
So basically, it's just designed to make it so that the game sucks, but the audience has to watch.
Okay, they should like add a golden snitch to MMA or something. Like it's running around the edge of the ring. So if you're getting knocked out and you can't really stand up and do a good fight anymore, you grab the snitch really fast. Yeah. Right.
Also, other modification to MMA is everyone has to be in wizard robes for some reason.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Okay. So that was one thing that the fire struck me as like the writers were just trying to make something happen and it didn't make sense and it didn't sell it. Another one that really stuck out to me that again, maybe made sense. I'm going to stop saying maybe it made sense in the book. Cause like, I just have to judge it as the show.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, same with here. Like maybe all this makes sense in the book. We have no idea.
Audience can apply that caveat globally to everything we say from now on. The whole thing about cutting open the dude's stomach and finding seal meat in there and like knowing it's seal meat or even having the idea to do that was completely absurd in the way that it was portrayed in the show, right?
Yes.
What you could have said is, okay, so Captain Steubing had the idea to do that, I believe. He said, hey, doctor, cut open his stomach, right? He speaks Eskimo, right? So he could have been like, it's an Eskimo tradition in these parts. Like he spoke Eskimo so well that he understood everything that was being said, even though in the beginning they sort of said like, oh, I don't know that, but he was able to have conversations.
He's like, he's not fluent, but he's
better at Eskimo than I am at Spanish. All right. And I took a few years of Spanish in grade school. So he, like, you could have sold it as like, it's tradition that Eskimo, when they meet a visitor under friendly circumstances, always give them food. And that would proactively give him an idea. Oh, I can then determine if this was friendly circumstances or not. But that's not what happened. What happened is he went up to the guys on the sleds. The dude who got killed went up to the guys on the sleds and they're sort of trying to communicate. And then he asks them for food and they gladly give him some. Okay. But if he hadn't asked them for food, that wouldn't have happened.
Okay.
Right. And so why would you think that he would have something in his stomach at all, much less seal meat? Like, it doesn't proactively make sense as a thing that you would look for if you were trying to solve a murder.
Okay, well, two things.
You know what I mean?
First of all, I'm a little bit less worried about that than you are. And the only reason is because they were very clear to show Captain Steubing getting this idea by having inspected the guy who gave him the seal meat's body and seeing that he was holding the seal meat bag. So I'm assuming that that is what we are meant to believe.
But the bag was right there on the sled, like, originally. Like, the guy was like, food? And I was like, oh, yeah, I got some seal meat right here. Like, it would have been there anyway. I don't know. It just... That one bothered me.
Well,
like,
okay. But
all the many things on the sled to, like, look at the food bag, which they would have had because they're trekking across a place and saying, I bet he's got seal meat in his stomach. It just didn't. It didn't make sense.
Let me say this. So, although I'm not sure I necessarily agree with that part, because I'm like, well, okay. I mean, yeah, is it maybe not the best? Sure, but is it that far-fetched? Not necessarily, at least to me. But here's my problem with it, separate from that. Number one, so what? This is not a trial. And nobody got to see that evidence. Like, it's not like they got up in court and had an actual, like, evidence bag with the seal meat in it. He could have said anything and it would have been the same degree of plausibility, right? Like, it wasn't evidence. He was acting like he needed to provide evidence to the rest of the crew, but this is not. It's not a context where that makes any sense, because it's still just him just saying it. Nobody knows that he actually found the seal meat in there. What if he and the doctor just agreed to lie about it, right? It's not.
Yeah, but
not in a context where that makes much sense.
So this is the first, this is the first hostile thing that Hickey did that he knew about, right? The capturing and killing the dog happened before this, but the captain didn't know about that. He just knew the dog was missing, right?
Well, and he also knew that he had him whipped as a boy for sedition.
Oh, that was before this, right? Yeah. So that's why he was suspicious that there might be, yeah. It didn't work for me the way it was. I can imagine the version that I would have preferred.
But
right?
Let me just go one further and say the other reason I didn't like it. The other reason I didn't like it was because I don't fundamentally understand. It's a lot of writing that doesn't really do what it needs to do. So this isn't a courtroom drama. Like, the point of a military command structure is that the captain determines what needs to happen and then you go forward. If you're going to actually court-martial someone, that's like a thing. Like, you sit down and there's like sides presented and stuff. Yeah. So I didn't really understand what was supposed to be happening. Like, if you want to hang somebody and you're hanging someone because you're the captain and you just decided that you're going to, then that's what's going to happen. If you're doing an actual court-martial, then I expect to see the court-martial. But what happened in this scene was like some weird, I'm presenting evidence on a soapbox kind of, but it doesn't matter because the verdict is already that you're guilty and I'm the one who decreed it and we're going to hang you. So it just, the whole thing didn't feel at all like the thing I was saying I liked about the earlier parts of the show, which is that it felt like you were actually on a boat doing boat things. This felt like random writing. Yeah. Like, we just wrote some crap like from Modern Family or something. Like, some writer who writes sitcoms came in and wrote the thing down that, like, someone's going to say some stuff on a box and then the guy hangs, right? Yeah.
Well, and also...
Oh, sorry.
I don't know. Never mind. Keep going.
And to add insult to injury, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, exactly.
It doesn't matter because he doesn't get hung because the beast randomly shows up at this exact moment because they don't want Hickey to hang or something, which again is really lazy writing, right? It's like the whole thing was a giant lazy pile. Yeah, this particular
Beast Ex Machina.
Yeah, it was not good. It's Toonbach Ex Machina.
Toonbach Ex Machina. Yeah. I have more gripes written down, but they're kind of tiny. Okay. We could talk about the ending for a second, because I think, so with the whole Toonbach thing, the ending is kind of ambiguous, right?
Yeah.
in a sense. But what it looked like to me, so, you know, they kind of, after all this crap goes down that we're talking about, there was actually one, so they fight the Toonbach in the end, and okay, this part doesn't make sense. Let me. This was one of my small gripes, but because we're covering the spoilers that happened before the end,
Toonbach
right?
was my biggest gripe, actually. Is just all the Toonbach stuff I really just didn't like.
Well, even the way they bring it down doesn't totally make sense. Just like a lot of other things with the show, there's sort of three things happening, and none of them really. Like, he's kind of sick from being poisoned with lead poisoning, or maybe forks, right?
Yeah.
And at the end, he's so sick that he's like barely moving, and like he's trying to eat, but kind of barfing him out because he's super sick. And then Captain Stubing like drags the chain on his neck for a second on this giant beast, and that, I guess that was, when I saw that, I was like, oh, I guess he's gonna try to choke it, and then he stops, and then I guess
dies. My read on that was that he died from the poison that all of the dudes had eaten. That's what I said.
Well, yeah.
I don't know.
Because that chain wasn't going to do anything to that dude.
Yeah.
From like, but then at the end, he's like, "You're letting me stay after what I did to Toonbach," and I'm like, "Dude, you didn't do jack."
I agree.
What are you talking about? Yeah, but anyway, the thing that I thought was really good that fit into the version of the show that I would have liked if it was all this way, is like the Eskimo girl wants to save him, and she doesn't understand manacles.
Right.
So she's like, I've got to cut his hand off to get him out of this thing.
Yes, that was great.
Like, she doesn't know to look for keys, right?
Right.
That was good.
Yeah.
It's interesting that he didn't get black botulism poison after that. I was sort of expecting that, but whatever. You know, she put some of the magic ointment on him that she was doing to other people. Or they just stuck him in the
fire.
Yeah. Anyway, so the thing about the ending that I kind of thought was interesting but didn't totally like is that they're sort of also doing this thing where the collision of the sea men with the Eskimos ends up killing both groups, right?
Yes.
And that is in part why I think the Toonbach is there, even though it's kind of stupid. So like the thing that you kind of notice in the last scenes, right? When he finally shows up with Silna at the, like, oh, he's back in Eskimo civilization, right?
Right.
She brings him there. They sort of do this little debrief or whatever.
Yeah.
There's like 12 Eskimo tents or something. The people are wary of him. One of the kids goes and hides in a tent, whatever, right? It fast forwards to 2 years later when the dudes show up.
Yeah.
There's like 6 Eskimo tents, right? And that could be maybe the group divided or whatever, but it's part of this pattern, right? And then after he tells them to, tell them I'm dead and blah, 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 then it cuts to this thing of him marching, and he's marching with just like a few people. That's like, I mean, maybe that's his new Eskimo family with his kid, but I don't think so, because I don't think enough time really passed for that. Yeah. And then there's a thing where, like, in one of the least emotional shots ever because of the amount of CG, I guess he's like, was going to be trying to be spearfishing, but like froze to death on the ice. But like the kid is alive or something is my interpretation of the scene. But it's so weird because like,
I did not get that from
it's that. It's like he's frozen and matted on and not moving. And they have this thing where the kid like twitches and moves so that you know it's not a still image. But it's also like the camera's pulling out and there's like CG snow and stuff. And it looks kind of Toonbach fake and weird at the same time as trying to be dramatic or interesting, right? I guess you could decide that he's like not dead, but I read this as this pattern of...
Okay.
I read it as this pattern of the Eskimos are slowly dying out because they don't have enough food, because the Toonbach used to provide their food like he does, you know, early on, like after Silna,
he brings the seal.
He brings her a seal, right? Which is pretty freaking far, like wherever the ocean was, because she was hanging out by the boats at that point. She was within walking distance of the boats, so like somehow he brought a seal to her and she was hungry and ate it. So like there's some amount of food providence that happened that way.
That's a good point. I hadn't thought about that. Yeah.
That was my interpretation of that ending. It seemed interesting, but also because I didn't feel this show had that much heart, I didn't. It more felt like a mechanical thing to do to seem profound at the end than something that really mattered. I don't know what you thought. Yeah. What did you think those shots were?
I did not. So one of the unfortunate side effects of me significantly disliking the show from the point where they split the party, which was the last 3 episodes, is that by the time we got to the scene that you're talking about, I was fairly unhappy and was not really interpreting the shots on that level at all. I was just like, okay, the show's over. That's it. Like, I liked the first 7. I didn't like these 3. I was not engaged with it on an artistic level at that point at all. So I did not interpret it as anything other than just him not wanting to basically revisit all of the horrible stuff that would have happened if he had decided to go back. So he tells them that he died just simply to not have to like face it. Basically, like it was just like an act of sort of emotional cowardice. And then I just read that as like, and then that's the end of the movie. It's just him thinking about that, and that's it. I didn't actually think that they were trying to tell me information in that shot, but you know, I'd have to go back and watch it.
I think they were. If you go watch it with that in mind, you can let me know sometime if you think that makes sense to you. That was my interpretation of the ending. What I did like, though, leading up to the end, I always have liked things that are nonlinear and discontinuous, and where your mind gets to fill in blanks. I agree that the seagull thing was a little too, like if it was like a David Lynch movie where there was a lot of seagull-like things and they kind of connected. Like David Lynch does this thing where things kind of connect but don't totally connect, but you get to think about them and have this activity of trying to, when you're trying to put the puzzle pieces together and they look like they maybe fit, but they don't totally fit. And you're like, oh, it's not that one. That's like what a David Lynch movie does a lot of the time. Right. So the seagull wasn't that, but it could have been that. But the part that I liked was when him and Silna are trekking back to Eskimo land and they pass the rest of the captain's party, which had tried to go on, and like they left these men behind and then they left these men behind. And then he gets to like Gold McChainface, who was like the guy who he put in command on the beach. He was obviously like totally like warlord of the East at that point or something. I liked the version of the movie that I could fill in my head of what happened to that party. Right?
100% agree.
Because it was more reasonable and didn't have these flaws that we're talking about.
100% agree. Yeah.
Because
ambiguity is very good for me as well, as long as it's not ambiguity of the form I literally can't think of any way this could have worked. As long as it's like there's multiple things I can think of that would fill in this gap and they're not going to tell me which one it is, I'm totally fine with that.
Yeah.
And honestly, the part where they kill the Toonbach, for example, I actually quite liked the fact that there wasn't some specific magical way this thing died. Like it was just kind of a shit show, and maybe it died from the poison, maybe it did. I actually liked that one ambiguous aspect of it. I just didn't like anything else about it. Like I just didn't like the fact that we were having this battle at this point, and the fact that we were in this weird, like the guy's going to try and feed his like I didn't really like most of what led up to it, but actually I like when things happen and it's not immediately clear like really why they did. I'm actually totally on board with that. I just, most of the back half, like the seagull thing didn't feel that way to me, right? Like it felt more just like, wait, what? And not, something happened as a result of the seagull and we're not telling you what it was. You fill it in, right?
Yeah. I don't know. I have other gripes about it, but I think I hit the major ones, right? Like every, I mean, I can always complain about the AMC logo for a long time, but
so I can't remember if the AMC logo was on. What did you watch this on?
It was just in browser,
Okay, so I watched it on Hulu on the PlayStation 4, and I don't think it had that.
Right. Maybe I'm gonna have to watch stuff that way. It was real. I actually had to put electrical tape on my screen because it was like this white logo down in the corner,
I feel like that would have really aggravated me.
There were a lot of dark scenes in the show,
Okay.
It's a darkly lit show a lot of the time, and it is super obnoxious. So
that sounds horrible, and I'm pretty sure that didn't happen for me.
Okay.
That may have had something to do with why I like this show better as well. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe my brain's just better at filtering it out. I don't know. I'll have to go look and see what happens in Hulu if you do that.
Yeah. I don't know. I also just felt like, and I guess I'm elevating a few of my nitpicks to a major complaint. Like, and again, I think in part it combines with your statement that like with the fire, that it didn't really matter. It wasn't really like about anything, and didn't.
Yeah.
It was just an event that was stuck in there. Like the different causes of death that were like hounding these guys were variegated, and many of them didn't matter or have meaning, right? So there was there's random accidents, which happen a lot, but also had this mystical foreboding, like, oh, this land is cursed or something, which is the sort of thing they would say a lot in the beginning, right? Or this land doesn't want us to live, right? There was that category.
Right.
There was
but wait, why is that bad? I'm not sure I understand. What is
let me finish with the complaint, right? Because it's not about that one thing. It's about all these things together. Like, there's just like, remember the guy from like episode 2 or maybe even 1 who's like hallucinating and sees the Eskimo shaman in the ship?
Yes.
And then goes crazy. That never goes anywhere, right?
No, it doesn't.
And so, but that's like, are you supposed to think that guy,
right? Like
that guy was going crazy from the lead poisoning botulism that you didn't know about yet? Maybe, except I have to go back and watch, but I think that guy, he was kind of a pudgy shaman dude with like face mask or something.
Yeah.
I think that was the same Eskimo as the pudgy guy who was in the party that Hickey first attacked, who had the party that had the seal meat. And they said later one of them got away and ran in that direction, right? But that guy never was seen again. I sort of feel like that was supposed to be the same guy, but I don't know. But anyway, that was another way that a guy was dying, right?
Okay.
There's the monster just like shredding dudes.
Yeah.
Tearing them apart. That was another way. There was the monsters stealing people's souls.
Yes.
But where they didn't physically die, which was completely unnecessary and happened. And they kept bringing it up. And it really happened because
you saw it
happened. You saw it happen. And there were just a number of guys who were just like, you didn't see it happen to them, but they were like vegetables, right? There were 2 guys who were like eyes open, alive, but like there's nothing there, right? So I think they kind of wanted that so that Hickey would have a weird motivation of like, I want to be a supernatural thing tied to eating people's souls or whatever. But like, maybe it was like, maybe that's a thing in Aleutian mythology and they wanted to, I don't know, but it didn't, like, what? Why is this here?
Well, again, this is what I have the same complaint, right, that I would levy against that particular part.
Yeah.
Which is that I'm actually 100% okay if you want to have a soul-eating beast in your show, but then you need to use that for something. So if you just randomly decide that there's a soul-eating beast in the thing, that to me doesn't really, I'm like, okay, fine. That's like really Marvel writing-ish to me.
Yeah.
If instead you were like, okay, the general idea here obviously is that, like, if you're at sea, locked in the ice for 2 years, eventually, like, you will start to be completely crazy in a soulless way as well, potentially, like Lord of the Flies style, not I ate too much lead.
Yeah.
So a fictionalized version of that is a creature that actually eats your soul. It's just a metaphor for like what's actually happening to you. That could have been interesting. Like if you actually wanted to draw a comparison between what's happening to these sailors as they're locked in the ice for over a year and they're just like losing their humanity, and the way that you portray that is like a mythical polar bear that eats your soul, great. Like, show me that show and I'll like it. But that's not what this was. It was just like randomly sometimes the polar bear eats your soul.
Yeah, and even
right?
so,
it just isn't interesting. Again, it's nothing wrong with it. It's just not interesting.
So, and similarly, like even at the end, right? I don't. This bot doesn't bother me as much, but it falls into the pattern. Like on its own, it would be fine, but it falls into the pattern. Like at the end, they reveal that Mr. Hickey is not actually Mr. Hickey and was like already a crazy psycho who like stabbed the dude.
In the first place. Yes.
Yes. So like he didn't go crazy from being on the ship.
Right.
He was just already a psycho, right?
He was just already a thief. Yeah.
Which I get, like, objectively, I can't really complain about because that does, like, if you get a couple hundred dudes together, I think they said 100 at some point was the original crew size or something, but...
And don't forget, Mr. Hickey's motivation for knifing a guy...
was to chill in the Bahamas.
Was like to get to Hawaii or something, yeah.
Yes. That is, he couldn't think of a better way to get to Hawaii.
Like it was literally to get to Hawaii. That's not a joke. That's
and I forget. Like Captain Steubing says, "Well, you could have just volunteered." I forget what he said.
Yeah.
About that, but like,
which is a pretty bold move considering the fact that you don't know if they're ever going to find the Northwest Passage. You're rolling a pretty big die there. If your only goal is to get to Hawaii.
Yeah, and he's supposed to be smart, right? So
yeah.
like, just go on one of the ships that's going to Hawaai. There's got to be some.
Go around the south. Go around the south way. You know what I'm saying?
Objectively, in some sense, that makes sense, but it's like, it's off theme. It's like not that good of an idea to put in your movie or your show if the point is that guys are going crazy from captivity. I mean, it's sort of on theme in the sense that, like, okay, the psychopaths are going to take over and be in positions of power, right? Like, that makes sense. That's a thing about humanity, but they like spend so much time on that.
Well, and again, it wasn't interesting because the machinations took over. Like, this is, I hate to keep harping on this, but it really is pretty much key to just my, like, preferences in writing are 100% dictated by this. So it's just that, look, you've got 10 45-minute episodes. It's not that much time.
Yeah.
When you're choosing what to put in here, it should be the things that are maximally interesting. Just randomly making this guy a criminal before he came out, it doesn't have any bearing on the story. And similarly, the fact that he becomes a megalomaniac and like tries to like mutiny and all this other stuff, that's fine, but it becomes about the literal set of steps that he does, which is like a plot heavy thing, and not about the characters anymore. And at that point, I lose interest because the plot, like, again, it's not a like clever science fiction story. The plot itself is not going to sell me on this show. You're not going to like have some crazy, interesting plot thing that makes me want to watch it just for that. So it has to be about the interpersonal and character dynamics in order to sell it, you know?
Yeah. Well, I guess so. The question is, do we watch season 2 of this? I get the feeling that you already would watch it, right? Because you like the show enough.
I would watch it in the sense that I'd try out the first episode to see if it's similarly well done. I mean, the fact that it's literally unrelated means I don't know that I would expect it to be good because it's not even the same. It's not the same writers. It's not the same anything.
Oh, it's that unrelated. Okay.
It's completely unrelated. So like, you know, I don't know. Ridley Scott made Blade Runner, and I think it's probably one of my favorite movies. He also executive produced Blade Runner 2049, which is one of my least favorite movies. Yeah. So like, the fact that he's picking the people in charge doesn't necessarily fill me with any particular, it could go either way. I don't know. Since
we talked about Harry Potter and Battlestar Galactica, can I say one funny thing about Blade Runner?
Which one?
Which is the original Blade Runner.
Okay.
Which is, for many years, people who thought they were so smart about computers made fun of the scene where he takes the photo, right?
Oh,
and he's like, enhance, zoom in, pan. And everyone's like, haha, he's looking at things that weren't in the original scene. And like,
No, we can do
For
that.
what we know today, yeah, you just like back solve the BRDFs of all the shit. So it's funny that like the things that people thought were wrong and goofy and that they were so smart about, it's Dunning-Kruger, right? In some sense, the Dunning-Kruger of not being far enough in technology.
Well, but the other thing too is that we actually have that. So it's not that you could take the BRDFs. They have these papers. There's like diffuse and indirect reflection reconstruction papers. I
don't know how well that works yet for the kind of scene, because it was mostly matte surfaces and stuff, but like you can imagine it.
It's not as good as it was in Blade Runner by any stretch of the imagination, but they are doing it, right?
Yeah. Someone in chat says season 2 looks like a social justice storyline, but who knows? I propose that we do the experiment that each of us watches episode 1 and then we decide if that's a thing.
Okay.
Because like for the same reason that you just said, you don't know what the quality is going to be better or worse. I also don't know. If it was exactly like this first season, I would sort of start watching it and see if I happen to like it more because of the setting or the character. Better like if there were 3 James McJameses in it instead of 1, right? That would really make the difference for me, right?
My chat is demanding that I watch the movie The Lighthouse instead.
Okay. Well, I can write that down and see what it is.
Like black and white, like art with a capital A flick. I have not seen it myself, so.
Okay. I don't know anything about it. Anyway, we can decide what the sequel is if we want it. I don't know. I feel like I didn't say anything super smart during this discussion, but it was fun to hang out and talk about. So are we actually done? Is there more that you want to say? I feel like I've exhausted what I have to say.
I don't think so, because like I said, this show to me was mostly hitting a experiential threshold that made me think that it's a recommend. Like I was like, I'm thumbs up on this because I felt like for at least the first 7 episodes or so, which is the vast majority of the screen time, right? I mean, 7 to 8 episodes out of 10, I really felt like it did a good job capturing that kind of feel. And that gets across my bar of this is, good to watch. It wasn't the kind of show where I was like, oh my God, this is incredibly profound, or it's my favorite show ever, or it's the worst show ever, or anything like that. So I don't have that much to say beyond sort of just the very like literal criticisms we went over. So I think I pretty much got everything. I don't think I have anything.
I'm thinking of a random detail. Maybe you know the answer to this.
Okay.
How does it make sense? This is very minor, right?
Okay.
How does it make sense that one guy somehow stole James McJames's boots? Do you remember that? They make a deal of Captain Steubing looking at the guys when he first shows up in like the rebel Hickey camp, right?
Yes.
He's looking with dismay at some of the people who were there who he thought he trusted, right? And one of them is wearing JJ's boots, right? Which they make a point of showing when they bury him, I guess, or they put him in a bag. I thought they would light him on fire or something at that point, right? But maybe they leave him there.
I can't remember what they did to his body. When I saw the boots, it was very clear to me that the implication was that this dude stole them off the body.
Yes,
but how? I couldn't remember. I didn't remember exactly what the last time I saw the boots was, so I don't know. I don't know.
The weird thing is, positionally, Hickey's party, I believe, was supposed to be in front, right? Because they left first, and they were a little bit smaller, and then the Steubing party was sort of behind, and somehow, without the Steubing party seeing the Hickey party's trail ever, despite the fact that they were sending out hunting parties and shit, somehow they stayed within 8 miles of each other the whole time, which is in the same way that in sci-fi movies, nobody writing those ever knows how big space is or how big a planet is.
Yeah.
Like in a sci-fi movie, a planet is like one block of San Francisco or something, right?
A planet is roughly the size of one ice cave, so that if original Spock is on the planet, he
will in the ice cave.
Be a single ice cave that you can be on in that planet.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
In that same way, like, people don't understand what it's like to trek across land for weeks or months, right? Like, it doesn't make any sense.
So one thing again I would say to this, and again, those sorts of complaints to me just don't matter, especially in a show like this. It would be great if they were all accurate, but it's like at that point in the story, there were so many things that I was like, I feel like the writing's kind of lost its way here that I just don't even care about the boots. But what I will say is, again, I do wonder if there's a little bit of the Game of Thronesiness happening there, in the sense that this is a book that was presumably condensed in some ways.
Yeah,
and it's like, maybe they screwed up. Like, maybe they were like, oh crap, we condensed
cut the scene
part,
that made this make sense.
and now this guy can't have got the boots, and like, we don't, and they never probably even realized they screwed up, because they were just, like, putting things in.
Only,
But
like,
I don't know.
If I was going to go watch it again, what I would watch for was that guy in the Stubing party until after they buried JJ, and then did he defect and
Maybe
somehow
he did,
knew?
yeah.
Like, that is the thing that makes the most sense.
Because you know that somebody did that, because there's the guy who like double crosses them when he the guy who like claims that he found the ocean and leads the captain into the trap or whatever.
Yes.
That guy obviously was a defector, right? So maybe there were I don't know.
Like, yeah, somehow they had to be in. So I wasn't clear on if that guy. I wasn't clear on if that guy was with the Stubing party the whole time, or if he somehow snuck in and people didn't realize. It's too small of a group. Like, people would know. The
guy said, like, before, he was like, we need to send a message to our guy in the other party. He said that, so he believes at least that
right.
with them. And again, this is why I say, and not to sound like a broken record, this is why I say I really just don't care, is because that's not interesting. Like, this is fundamentally not a show that is succeeding because of the like really intricate Sherlock Holmes versus Professor Moriarty antics of the plot. Like, so it's like, that is not the kind of thing that I care about. And the fact that there was so much of that crap happening in the back half, I think, was a real detriment to the show, because it was forcing the show to become very procedural in a way that just does not matter. Like, all I need to know is that this guy stole the boots off of that guy's body. That's the interesting part. Like, that tells me something about that character, and the reaction of the other characters to him having stolen the boots is what I want to know. I don't give a shit about like who was in which party when or what. It's like, that just fundamentally doesn't create an interesting narrative. And so the fact that we spend so much time on that kind of stuff in the back half was really the part that was a bummer for me, and is raising a bunch of issues for you as well, because now, because you're turning into this very like meticulous procedural show, like, now you create opportunities to stumble all the time, because wait, how did that guy see this, or they should have been this far away, or why were they walking the same direction, or how did that guy see this? All of those things just wouldn't happen if you didn't construct a narrative that required this us versus them camp story at the end. So just it was just bad decision all around. Probably the book's fault for doing that, but they could have just not done it. I mean, I don't know how many Dan Pattinson fans there were who would be up in arms about the fact that you changed the ending of The Terror. Probably not as many as J.K. Rowling army of people or whatever, but still.
Yeah. Why do people always recommend that I should watch Mr. Robot? I believe that Casey also does not. Literally every day now, somebody says, every time I stream, someone's like, dude, you should watch Mr. Robot. And I'm like, no.
I saw season 1 of Mr. Robot, and I guess what I would say is, if there was a need in the universe for someone to remake Fight Club poorly and for like 10 more hours,
yes,
I guess they succeeded. But why is that a thing we needed? Like, it's super messy. There's a bunch of weird plot holes in it. It's like overlong. Dude,
Fight Club has balls, okay?
And
Mr.
it was
Robot doesn't.
And it was first. And it's the same story.
Yes.
So what the hell?
I mean, yeah. So anyone saying I should watch Mr. Robot, you probably haven't seen Fight Club. So go see Fight Club, which will not be as good now that you've seen Mr. Robot.
Well, one thing I'll say about Fight Club too is not Fight Club 2, but Fight Club 1. There is no Fight Club 2 yet. There will be someday, I'm sure.
You know, in the same way they just made Bill and Ted 3 with Bill and Ted being really old, they should make old Edward Norton and Brad Pitt Fight Club.
Yes.
That would be awesome.
Yes.
And like the Brad Pitt with his shirt off, like, but you make him really, because Brad Pitt probably still doesn't look that bad compared to most dudes.
He probably still
like,
works out. Yeah.
You got to wait another 20 years.
Yeah.
And give him lots of makeup. And like, it'll be good.
Fight Club, I watched the entire movie of Fight Club right up until the plot twist, and I did not see it coming at all. Maybe that's just me being slow, but I literally did not see it coming.
Somebody Wikipedia linked Fight Club 2.
Oh, okay. Mr. Robot was so transparent that, like, I knew in the first 5 minutes of the show, I'm like, oh, that's not... Like, it was not even remotely the same level of subterfuge or creativity, I thought. But anyway.
And, by the way, Mr. Robot leans on the trope, oh, the guy's kind of crazy, so we can do all sorts of things.
Yes.
That's our excuse for everything is the character's kind of crazy. So we can decide in the second, I don't know if they actually did this because I didn't watch the second season, but like we can decide that thing in the first season wasn't really that thing because, you know.
I didn't watch the second season because it's like the first season wasn't good enough. So I was like, I'm probably...
I think I watched the first episode and I was like, yeah, no, this isn't going anywhere.
At first, when I first started watching, what I will say about Mr. Robot is like, before I actually got, to the end of maybe episode 2 or something, when it was just sort of starting out, I was like, well, maybe it's good because, it looks good. I like Rami Malek. It's a well-shot show. I mean, I even like, what's his name? Pump Up the Volume.
Kristen Slater.
I mean, I love Heathers. If you want to watch a good movie, go watch Heathers.
Yeah, watch Heathers, guys.
Heathers.
If you've never seen Heathers, watch Heathers.
Heathers is another one of my favorite films. Like, especially considering like it's a low budget, more or less. Like, it wasn't low budget, but it was compared to a today's film. It's not a particularly elaborate film, but it's just really well constructed and it's interesting.
It's also one of those movies that seems to get remade in much worse versions every 15 years or whatever, like the group of high school girls who are mean, right? Or whatever.
And the other thing about Heathers is that if you watch it today, it seems like it's the only thing that lets you know it's not about today is that there's not as much like overt PC-ness among the students. But other than that, it reads exactly like it was made today in terms of how like the school reacts to these things and so on. Is really, it's like, it's one of those movies that came from something like the writer who isn't even like, I don't think he ever wrote anything else good or anything, like just happened upon something that just happens to be true and nailed it. And it's like, you can watch it and you're like, yep.
Yeah. Although the problem with Heathers, the thing that makes it not as good, Christian Slater is just crazy, and you find out at the end, and so he does insane things, right? It would be a better movie if like I don't know, if that part was different, I think.
I don't know if I agree with that. Why is that a problem? Because so if I had to, now that we're going to start talking about Heathers, maybe we need to watch Heathers.
I haven't seen Heathers in so long. I mean, I've seen it like 5 times, but the last time was probably 20 years ago or 15 years ago. So it's been a
My
long,
argument for Heathers would just be Christian Slater isn't the main character, though. He's supposed to represent that craziness that the main character decides not to go down. So I would not agree with the assessment that him being crazy is somehow bad, because he's almost like the devil on your shoulder. Like, that's the point. If Winona Ryder was supposed to be crazy, I agree that would be a worse movie.
Yeah, I could see that.
Maybe the next one of these needs to be about Heathers. That's the actual. We can go watch Heathers and then have a debate about whether Christian Slater should or shouldn't be crazy. But there you go.
Yes.
All right, folks.
That was a good 3-hour conversation. Minus 15 minutes.
That was yes. All right. Well,
that was like 4 episodes of this show worth of time. It's like Red Letter Media, where the thing takes as long as the show.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Men on Film with John and Casey.
That could be interpreted quite the wrong way.
Well, don't you remember In Living Color? You don't remember this? There was In Living Color. Literally, it's like Men on Film.
I don't think I saw that.
They were interpreting it the wrong way in that skit as well. Anyway, yes. We don't have a name for this, and we don't know if we'll do it again. But there you go. The Terror. Again, if you did not catch the beginning of the stream, the show we were talking about was called The Terror. It's an anthology show, so season 1 and season 2 are completely unrelated. So the one we were talking about was season 1. It's on Hulu streaming and maybe somewhere else as well.
I might have accidentally tweeted that it was Netflix, which is fake news.
It is definitely not Netflix.
Maybe I didn't say that.
So thanks for tuning in, and we will see y'all next time.
Bye, everybody.